Hello everyone, I'm the Creep's Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I was about 12 or 13 years old back then. I used to walk to my psychiatrist's office every week for my appointment. It was a half-hour walk each way, but I never minded it. I actually liked walking alone after dark. Everything felt quiet, peaceful, and slow. The air felt cooler, and the roads felt emptier. I liked looking at the way street lights made pools of yellow light on the road and how the trees swayed slightly in the evening breeze. There was never really anyone around at that hour, especially on the quieter streets I walked down. I didn't live in a dangerous neighborhood, and my walk never took me through any dangerous parts either. It was all suburban, quiet, normal. I remember that evening clearly. I had my hands shoved into the pockets of my hoodie. I was just walking, staring at the pavement, thinking about nothing in particular. I'd look up once in a while, see the yellow glow of windows in houses I passed by, sometimes smell food cooking. Everything felt normal. About halfway to my destination, though, that calm disappeared. A car came driving down the street, a big old Cadillac with rust on the lower edges. I could hear the music blasting before I even saw it. It was some rap song with deep bass, making the car panels vibrate. As it came closer, I saw people hanging half out the windows. There were both guys and girls, all of them looking like they were in their late teens or early 20s. They were laughing and yelling out at me. I didn't really hear what they were saying at first. Their voices blurred together with the music, but I knew it was jeering, taunting. The sound of their laughter echoed down the street, even after they passed me. I ignored them. I just kept walking, eyes down, trying to keep my calm. I told myself they were just bored teenagers trying to mess with random people. I walked another minute or two, and suddenly I heard that same deep bass again. The car had circled around and came down the street again. This time their words were clearer, filled with insults, calling me names I didn't even understand. Some were laughing, so hard they nearly fell out the windows. I kept my eyes on the pavement. My legs felt heavier now. There was a twist deep in my stomach. I didn't know who they were. I'd never seen them before. Maybe they lived in the area, or maybe they were just driving around looking for something to do. Either way, I wanted them to go away. I kept walking. My shoes scraped the pavement with each step. I tried counting my steps, focusing on that instead of the fear rising in my chest. Another minute went by, and the car came around again. They were deliberately circling the block, coming back to me over and over. They drove by slowly, yelling, laughing, pointing. My heart started pounding in my chest. I realized they weren't just passing by anymore. They were focusing on me. They wanted something out of this. As soon as they turned the corner and were out of sight again, I darted into someone's front yard and hid behind some tall bushes near their porch. My breathing was quick, and I could hear my own heart in my ears. I crouched there, trying to slow my breathing down. I could hear the car coming back again. I pressed myself against the branches. They didn't see me. They drove past, not yelling this time. Maybe they thought I'd gone inside one of the houses nearby. They turned the corner and disappeared. I thought I was safe. I thought maybe that was it. Stupidly, I stepped out of the bushes and went back to the sidewalk, continuing my walk to my psychiatrist's office. I told myself if I kept walking, they'd eventually get bored and leave me alone. But as soon as I started walking again, I heard them approaching from behind. The bass, the rev of the engine, the laughter. They spotted me and started yelling again, taunting, laughing, calling me names. The car passed by and turned the corner again. I felt panic starting to rise. My legs felt shaky as I ran, knowing I wouldn't get far before they circled around again. Up ahead, I saw an apartment building with thick bushes growing in front of it near the walkway. I quickly slipped behind them, crouching down low. The leaves were cold against my face. I stayed there, frozen, listening to my own breathing. My knees hurt from crouching so low, and I felt twigs and dead leaves poking into my legs. I kept staring out through a gap in the leaves, watching the street. I didn't have to wait long. Maybe only 30 seconds later, I saw a door open nearby. A man stepped out onto the porch, looking around. He was wearing a sleeveless undershirt, no shirt over it. I could see that his upper body was well built, not bulky like a bodybuilder but solid, toned. He had this serious look on his face as he looked around. probably wondering why someone was rustling around his bushes. He saw me crouching there and frowned, staring at me hard like he was trying to figure out if I was some burglar or kid trying to steal something. I stood up quickly and started explaining in a shaky voice. I told him how I was walking to my psychiatrist's office and how a bunch of teens in a car kept circling around me, yelling at me and following me. I told him I was scared and just needed somewhere to hide. I could see in his eyes the moment he realized I was telling the truth. He looked at my face, saw how my lips trembled and how my hands shook slightly. His face softened just a little, but he still looked serious. Just then, the car came down the street again. It pulled up right in front of us, stopping at the curb. The engine rumbled low. I looked at it and noticed something different. It wasn't as full as before. There were fewer people inside. The man beside me folded his arms across his chest, muscles tightening slightly. He just stared at them with a cold, hard look. He didn't say anything, but his stare said enough. I kept my eyes on the car, and then I saw why it was emptier. 3 of them were approaching on foot from the other side, walking towards us. The car had been driving east to west, and these 3 were walking from west to east. They were changing their plan. They wanted to trap me between them and the car. Maybe grab me, maybe drag me into the car. I felt my chest tighten in fear. My mouth went dry. But then they saw the man standing beside me. They saw the way he stood there, silent, arms folded, staring them down without any fear. They hesitated. One of the guys shrugged, and they all climbed back into the car. It started rolling forward again, and then sped up, disappearing down the street. The sound of the engine faded away, taking my fear with it little by little. The man turned to me, his eyes softer now. He offered to let me stay in his apartment until I felt safe enough to continue walking, or he could stand outside with me for a while longer if I wanted. I looked at him, and for a moment I wanted to take his offer. But I also didn't want to be late for my appointment. My body still shook slightly, but I felt like that was the last I would see of those people. I thanked him, my voice quiet but honest, and told him I'd keep going. He nodded once and went back into his apartment, closing the door behind him. For a moment I stood there, staring at that closed door, thinking maybe I should have stayed longer. The street felt so quiet again, but the fear still clung to my chest. I turned away and kept walking. Every shadow felt deeper. Every streetlight seemed too dim. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see headlights and hear the bass vibrating down the road again. But nothing came. The streets were silent, just like they always were at this hour. I reached my psychiatrist's office. The fluorescent lights in the lobby felt harsh and too bright compared to the darkness outside. My psychiatrist took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. I told him everything, every detail, my voice trembling as I spoke. He insisted on calling the police. They came and took a report from me. They asked questions, wrote things down in their notepads. Then they left. That was the last I heard of it. After my session, I stepped back outside. Normally I walked home the same way I came, but that evening I took different side streets, weaving through unfamiliar roads just to feel safer. The cool air felt sharper against my cheeks. The sky was almost fully dark now, with only a faint orange glow left on the horizon. Streetlights flickered on, lighting the sidewalks in small pools of light. I walked quickly, heart still pounding with leftover fear, eyes darting to every parked car I passed. I never saw that Cadillac again. I never saw those teenagers again either. But that night left something inside me, something heavy that I carried for a long time. The realization that sometimes people can just decide to hurt you for no reason. That even quiet streets and safe neighborhoods can hold shadows with teeth. I remember finally reaching home that evening. I walked inside, locked the door behind me, and just stood there in the silent hallway, listening to the pounding of my heart slowly quieting down. From then on, whenever I walked anywhere after dark, I kept my head up more. I kept my ears open for cars that circled back around. I still loved the quiet and peace of the night, but there was always that edge of fear under it now, like a small stone stuck in my shoe that I couldn't shake out. Something that reminded me every time I stepped out the door that the world can change in an instant, even on the calmest evening walks. When I was 10 years old, me and my sister lived in Thailand with our parents. We stayed in this big house that my dad rented because of his work. It was a nice place, with wide open rooms, shiny tile floors that felt cold under our feet, and glass windows that made the humid air feel even hotter when the sun came through them. But even though it looked nice, it never felt peaceful. The house was 2 stories high. My sister and I shared a room upstairs. There was another empty room connected to ours through a Jack and Jill bathroom. The empty room was always cold and quiet, and it had this tall, dark armoire pushed against the wall. The armoire had these carved designs on the doors, like flowers twisting up towards the handles, and it always smelled like old wood and dust. We had a maid. She was short, with thick black hair tied back into a low bun, and she always wore loose cotton clothes and slippers that slapped softly against the tile floors as she moved around. She cleaned and cooked and washed clothes for us. She would always yell at us about the ceiling fan in that empty room. She told us to turn it off if we were playing in there because it was wasting electricity. But me and my sister never even went inside that room. We never turned the fan on. Every time she scolded us, we just looked at each other and shrugged. I think she thought we were lying to avoid punishment, but we were just as confused as she was. The fan would be spinning slowly whenever she checked it, creaking sometimes as it went around. During the daytime, the house felt normal enough if we kept ourselves busy. We would do homework at the dining table, drink Milo in tall, cold glasses with ice cubes that clinked every time we took a sip, or lie on the couch with the ceiling fan whirring above us. But when it got dark, things changed. My sister and I would be sitting downstairs watching TV with the volume low, so we wouldn't get in trouble for staying up late. That's when we started hearing the noises. From upstairs, we would hear the quick patter of little feet running back and forth across the empty room. Sometimes it was so clear that we could even hear the squeaks of the floorboards under their weight, even though the floor was tile. Other times it sounded like someone was bouncing a ball against the walls. There was a rhythm to it, like thump, 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 pause, thump, and it always made my chest tighten with this cold feeling of dread. We would hear giggles too, light giggles like kids playing tag. When it first started, my sister and I would look at each other with wide eyes, waiting for the noises to stop. But they never did. It got to the point where we would just turn the TV louder to drown them out. One weekend, before the noises had really started getting intense, we had a friend come to sleep over. Her name was May, and she was one of those brave kids who always acted tough. She didn't believe in ghosts or monsters or anything like that. She was a little taller than us, with short hair that framed her round face. She always wore a bracelet with tiny gold bells that jingled every time she moved. That night, we decided to make blanket tents in the empty room. We dragged pillows and blankets in there, using chairs to hold the blankets up, making tunnels that connected the tents together. We laughed and crawled from one tent to the other, whispering secrets and playing with our glow sticks in the dark. The armoire stood there in the corner, silent and tall, its doors closed tightly. We turned off the main light and only had our little lantern lamp switched on. It cast long shadows across the ceiling, and the shadows moved whenever we shifted. After a while, we lay in our tents just talking about school, about boys we thought were cute, about candies and snacks we wanted our parents to buy next time we went to the supermarket. I remember staring at the thin fabric of the blanket above me, watching how it glowed with the lamp's dim light. I was listening to May's voice when we heard it. It was a scratching noise, slow at first, like the tip of a fingernail being dragged across the wall behind the armoire. Then it got faster, like scratching and scraping all over the wall. The sound went up and down, stopping for a second, then starting again. My heart started beating, so fast I thought I was going to throw up. My sister froze beside me. We didn't say anything. We just lay there, staring at each other with wide eyes. I could hear May's breathing get shallow too. The scratching kept going, filling the whole room. It felt like the walls were vibrating with it. Then, out of nowhere, the armoire doors creaked. Slowly at first, just a tiny squeak, then another, and then both doors slowly swung open by themselves. They opened so wide that we could see the empty shelves inside, just darkness and nothing else, but it felt like something was there, staring back at us. We didn't wait. May scrambled out first, her bracelet bells jingling wildly. My sister pushed the blankets away and ran after her, and I followed them, my knees hitting the hard tile floor as I crawled out from under the blankets. We didn't even stop to fold up the tents. We just ran out of the room, down the hallway, and into our bedroom. I slammed the door shut behind us and locked it. We sat on our beds, breathing hard, our skin prickling with fear. None of us slept properly that night. We kept the lights on until the sun came up, and even then we didn't want to go back into the empty room to clean up the blankets and pillows. We just left them there for the maid to pick up later. After that night, the noises got worse. Almost every evening, when the sun went down and the frogs in the swamp started croaking their low songs, we would hear the running footsteps upstairs. We would hear the ball bouncing against the walls, the giggles echoing through the hallway, and sometimes even little thuds, like something falling and rolling on the floor. The maid kept yelling at us about the ceiling fan. Every day she would come downstairs, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist, and say, "Why you turn on the fan again? Waste electricity." But we never touched it. We didn't even want to go near that room anymore. We just nodded and let her think what she wanted. One afternoon after school, we were sitting outside on the back patio drinking cold soda when the neighbor came by. She was an older woman, wearing a faded sarong and a wide straw hat to block the sun. She brought us fresh mangoes from her tree. As she handed them to us, she looked over the fence towards the swamp behind our house. The swamp stretched out for a long distance, with brownish-green water covered in lily pads and vines, and there was a strong smell coming from it when the wind blew. The woman told us, very casually, that a lot of people used to dump their babies in that swamp. She said it like it was a normal fact, like telling us it was going to rain tomorrow. I remember feeling my stomach twist when she said it. The thought of tiny bodies sinking into the dark water, disappearing under the thick green algae, made me feel like my chest was going to explode with fear. After that, every single sound we heard from the empty room felt even worse. Every giggle sounded sharper, every footstep louder. The scratches on the walls happened more often. We stopped going upstairs alone. If we had to go get something from our room, we would both go together, holding each other's hands, looking over our shoulders the entire time. Even the maid started refusing to clean the empty room after a while. She would just mop outside the door, wipe the doorknob with her rag, and move on to the next room. I never saw anything in that room with my own eyes, but it was the feeling that made it so terrifying. Every time I stepped inside, I felt this heavy, cold air pressing down on my shoulders. I felt like someone was watching me, following my every move with silent eyes. Even when I tried to tell myself it was just in my head, my body wouldn't listen. My hands would shake, and my knees would feel weak. My parents never believed us. They thought we were just kids making up stories. Whenever we tried to tell them about the footsteps or the ball bouncing, they would wave their hands and tell us to stop scaring ourselves. So we stopped telling them anything. We just lived with it. Years later, when we finally moved out of that house, I felt like I could finally breathe properly again. I remember sitting in the back seat of the taxi, watching the house get smaller as we drove away. The windows glared in the sunlight, and I could see the outline of the armoire in the empty room upstairs. It felt like something was standing at the window, watching us leave. I didn't look away until the house disappeared behind the trees and walls. Even now, when I think about that place, my chest feels tight. I can still hear the faint giggles in my head if I close my eyes and remember the way the ceiling fan creaked, spinning slowly in an empty room that we never dared to enter again. The swamp behind the backyard is still there, silent and still, holding all its secrets under the thick green water. I don't know what really happened in that house, but I know how it made me feel. That was enough to haunt me for the rest of my life. I still remember that day so clearly, even though it was 10 years ago. It was just an ordinary afternoon. I had come back from school and was sitting at the dining table doing my homework. My mom was in the kitchen making tea. I heard the mail slot open and the soft thud of letters falling onto the carpet by the door. My mom walked out to get the mail like she did every day. Usually, it was just bills or supermarket coupons or bank statements. But that day, she stood still for a while at the door, staring down at something in her hand. I didn't pay much attention at first. I kept solving my maths problems, trying to finish before dinner. But when she came back into the kitchen, her face was pale and she looked confused. I asked her what was wrong. She didn't answer me for a moment. She just sat down at the table across from me and placed the envelope on the table. I looked at it. It was a plain white envelope, the kind you buy in bulk from the store. On the front, it had my mom's full name and our full address. It looked like it had been written by someone with neat handwriting, almost like a teacher's writing, very round and spaced out properly. The only thing that was different was in the corner, where the return address is usually written. There was just one word written in capital letters, Florida. That's what confused her so much. We live over 1,000 miles from Florida. At that time, none of us knew anyone in Florida. We didn't have any family there, and my mom didn't have any friends there either. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single baby photo. I leaned over to look at it. It was a black and white photo of a baby sitting on a small blanket on grass. The baby was smiling. My mom just stared at it silently for a long time. I asked her who it was. She said softly that it was her. That was her baby picture. Then she pulled out a small folded piece of paper from the envelope. She opened it, and there was only one sentence written on it. It said, "I think you sent this by mistake." I didn't understand at first. I asked her what it meant. She said she had no idea. That photo was from a box in the basement. She hadn't taken it out in decades. It had been in there since before I was born. She never sent it to anyone. She never even touched that box in years. She kept it with all her old childhood things, school certificates, some letters from her parents who had died long ago, and small souvenirs from her youth. She had never sent any of that to anyone. She left the envelope and photo on the table and went down to the basement. I followed her because I was curious. The basement was always dark and dusty. We kept boxes lined up along the walls, old things we didn't need but couldn't throw away. There was a box labeled Mom Childhood. She pulled it out and opened it. She moved aside some old papers, and there were other photos, similar to the one she had received in the mail. The same type of paper, the same black and white style. It was definitely part of that collection. She sat back on her heels and just stared at the box for a long time. I stood there, feeling cold even though it was summer. I felt like someone had been inside our house. Someone had to have taken that photo. Someone had opened that box and taken out just that one picture. But who would do that? And why would they mail it back to her with that note? It felt like a threat, but it also felt confusing because the note sounded polite. It didn't say anything bad. It just said that she sent it by mistake. But she never sent it in the first place. That whole evening, my mom was quiet. She made dinner like normal, but she didn't eat much. My dad was away for work that week, so it was just the two of us at home. After dinner, I went to my room and tried to study for my science test the next day. But I kept thinking about that envelope. I kept imagining someone walking into our basement, taking the picture, then somehow traveling to Florida and mailing it back. It made no sense. We always locked our doors and windows. We never left the basement open to anyone. That night, I couldn't sleep well. I kept thinking about it over and over. Every small noise in the house felt scary. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the clock, every rustle of the trees outside felt like someone was moving around. I imagined someone standing in the basement, looking through our things in the dark. The next day, my mom called the police. They came and listened to her story, but they didn't really take it seriously. They said maybe it was mailed by a relative she forgot about. Maybe someone in her family moved to Florida and found the picture. My mom insisted she had no family there. They suggested maybe it was a prank or a mistake. Maybe someone bought old boxes at an auction or garage sale, found the photo, and mailed it back. But that didn't make sense either because the box was still in our basement. No one bought it. No one took it out. Days passed, but my mom kept thinking about it. She searched through every old address book she had, thinking maybe there was some old friend or relative who moved there without her knowing. She didn't find anyone. After a week or so, she stopped talking about it. But I knew she still thought about it. Sometimes I would see her sitting quietly, staring at nothing, her mind far away. Months passed and life went back to normal. School kept me busy. My dad came back from his work trip, and we never told him about it. My mom said there was no point worrying him about something so strange when there was nothing he could do. But whenever I went into the basement after that, I felt scared. I felt like there was something wrong with that place. I would imagine someone hiding behind the boxes, breathing quietly, waiting for me to leave so they could look through our things again. I started avoiding the basement completely. I would ask my mom to get whatever we needed from down there. Years went by, and we never heard anything about that picture again. No more envelopes came. No one called about it. No one ever explained it. But sometimes I think about it late at night when I can't sleep. I think about how it got there. Who sent it? Why they sent it? It bothers me because it's like an unfinished puzzle. When I got older, I asked my mom again if she ever found out who sent it. She said no, she never did. She kept that photo in her room after that. She didn't want to put it back in the box. She said she didn't want to lose it again. It felt almost like someone was trying to take it from her or remind her of something. She never really explained what she meant by that. A few years later, when I was in college, I came back home for winter break. One evening, I was sitting with my mom in the living room. We were talking about old times, and somehow the topic came up again. She told me something she hadn't told me before. She said that when she was young, her family used to travel to Florida for vacations once in a while. But that was when she was a child. They would go to the same small beach town every year. She didn't remember the exact address or the name of the people they rented the cottage from, but it was possible that someone there knew her family. Still, that didn't explain how her baby picture got there. It was from a box in our basement. It wasn't something her family left in Florida decades ago. She said it made her feel like her life was a circle, like it went away and came back for no reason. She said it felt like someone out there was watching her, someone who knew about her life when she was small, someone who wanted her to remember something. That thought stayed with me for a long time. Even now, when I visit home, I sometimes go to her room and look at that picture. It's in a small wooden frame on her bedside table. It's just a baby sitting on a blanket on grass, smiling at the camera. Nothing scary about it if you just look at it like that. But when you know how it came back to her after all those years, how it traveled over 1,000 miles for no reason, it feels different. It feels like someone is out there, someone we don't know, someone who knows us. I don't believe in ghosts or supernatural things. I don't think there was any spirit involved. I think it was a real person who somehow got hold of that picture, mailed it back to my mom with that note. I think about them sometimes, who they were, why they did it, whether they're still out there, watching us, remembering us. I wonder if one day, another envelope will come. I wonder what it will contain. I guess the thing that scares me most is not knowing. Not knowing who, not knowing why, not knowing how. Just living with that small, cold feeling in your chest. The feeling that someone you don't know knows everything about you. That feeling never really goes away. It just hides under everything else, waiting for a quiet night to come back and make you feel small and helpless again. That's what happened to us. It was just a photo in an envelope, but it changed how we saw our home forever. I was a kid when this happened, so just keep that in mind as you read this story. My great-grandmother had recently passed away. We weren't that close or anything. I didn't spend days with her, or sit and talk for hours, or anything like that. But whenever I went to my grandparents' house where she was living, she would always smile at me and give me a thumbs up. I don't know why, but that thumbs up always made me smile and giggle a little. It was a small thing. She never said much to me. I just remember her wrinkled hands, her quiet smile, and that thumbs up. Her thumb was bent a little with age and arthritis, and her nails were yellowed and thick, and she would lift that thumb slowly with a soft smile, looking straight at me. Sometimes I would be running past her in the living room, heading straight for the kitchen to get biscuits or to the backyard to play, and I'd see her sitting there on the couch with her blanket pulled up around her legs. She would look up at me, raise that thumb, and I'd burst into a smile, give her a thumbs up back, and keep running. It was always like that. I never thought much of it. She was just there, like the old furniture or the smell of mint tea coming from the kitchen or the framed wedding photos on the wall. Just another part of the house that made me feel comfortable. After she died, my grandparents put her framed photo in the living room, beside my granddad's medals from the war and their wedding photo. I didn't feel sad like the adults did. I didn't cry or feel empty. But for a few weeks after her funeral, I kept remembering her thumbs up. I don't know why. It just popped up in my head during random times, like when I was playing marbles alone in my room, or waiting in line for lunch at school, or watching cartoons on Saturday mornings. I would see her face in my mind, her thin white hair, her smile, and her thumb lifting slowly in the air. Every time I remembered it, I would smile too. Sometimes I even raised my thumb back, without thinking about it. One day after school, I was walking home. I remember it was warm, but not too hot. The sun was bright, and there were some clouds drifting slowly across the sky. I had my backpack slung over one shoulder because the strap was half broken. It kept sliding down, and I would jerk it back up every few steps. My shoes were getting tight, and my socks kept slipping under my heel, which was annoying me that whole walk home. I remember that I was thinking about my great-grandmother. I don't know what triggered it. Maybe I saw an old lady walking her dog on the sidewalk, Or maybe I saw a car that looked like my granddad's parked along the street. But I started thinking about her thumbs up. I remember trying to imagine why she always did it. Did she think I was a good kid? Was she just saying hello without talking? Did she even know who I was every time? I kept thinking about it. That wrinkled thumb kept appearing in my mind over and over as I walked. When I reached home, I remember pushing the front door open with my elbow because my hands were holding my lunchbox and my water bottle. The smell of food hit me right away, even though it was empty inside. My mom must have cooked earlier before leaving for her errands. The house smelled like fried onions and cumin. I kicked off my shoes by the door, leaving them half on the mat and half on the floor tiles like I always did, and walked to the kitchen to drop off my lunchbox. Then I decided to go downstairs. The basement wasn't like a dark horror movie basement. It was finished and bright, with white walls and a tiled floor, and my dad had set up an old TV and a sofa down there. That was where we kept the laundry machines and my dad's tools too. I liked hanging out there because it felt like my own quiet place. The stairs to the basement were a little weird. At the bottom of the stairs was a metal gate that my parents had installed when my little brother was a toddler, so he wouldn't crawl into the basement and fall on the tiles. The ceiling above the last step was low because there were pipes and ducts running along the roof. The gap between the top of the gate and the ceiling was maybe 4 feet. When tall people like my dad or uncle walked down there, they had to duck on the last step or they would bump their heads. I remember this next part so clearly, even today. I started running down the stairs like kids do, just stomping down with excitement for no reason at all. Maybe I was planning to watch cartoons or play with my Hot Wheels cars that I kept in a plastic tub down there. About halfway down, I tripped. I don't know what I tripped on. My foot might have caught on the edge of a step, or maybe I just missed a step entirely. I remember the feeling of my body pitching forward, my stomach flipping like I was on a roller coaster, and seeing the floor rushing up at me. I remember thinking, oh no, I'm going to smash my face into the tiles. I didn't have time to yell or think anything else. I just fell. But then, I didn't hit hard. I didn't smash through the gate. I didn't hit my head on the low ceiling or feel the metal bars slam into my chest or anything like that. I landed softly, like someone had caught me, like when my dad used to catch me when I jumped off the couch as a toddler. My feet hit the floor, and I stumbled forward a little but stayed on my feet. I remember standing there frozen, looking at the gate, and then up at the ceiling. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My knees felt weak, and my palms were sweating. I thought for sure I was going to be bleeding or hurt or something, but I felt fine. Not even a bruise. The first thought that came to my mind in that moment was of my great-grandmother. I saw her face so clearly in my head, as if she was standing right in front of me. Her kind eyes, her white hair combed back behind her ears, her thin lips lifting into that little smile, and then her thumb, lifting up slowly and shaking a little with age. That thumbs up. That was the first thing I thought about. Her giving me that thumbs up like she always did, like she was saying good job, or I'm here or it's okay. I remember standing there in that basement for what felt like minutes, staring at nothing, just seeing her face, and that thumbs up in my mind. After a while, I shook myself out of it and ran back upstairs. My heart was still racing, but I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't tell my mom when she came home later. I didn't tell my dad when he got back from work. I didn't tell my brother. I just kept it to myself. I sat at the dinner table eating quietly, thinking about what happened. That night in bed, I thought about it again. I lay there staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to my ceiling, thinking about how I fell and landed softly, thinking about how her face came to my mind instantly. I wondered if she had caught me somehow, but then I felt silly for thinking that. I was a kid. Kids think weird things. I told myself maybe I didn't fall that hard. Maybe my foot caught on a lower step, and I just stumbled instead of tripping fully. Maybe I was already close enough to the floor that it didn't hurt. But here's the thing. Now I'm an adult, and I still remember it so clearly. Every detail. The feeling of falling, the fear, the certainty that I would crash into the gate or the floor, and then the soft landing that felt impossible. And then her face, so vivid in my mind, with that thumbs up. I don't know what happened that day. I don't believe in ghosts or angels or any of that. Maybe my memory is exaggerating it. Maybe I imagined the fall was worse than it really was. Maybe my mind made up the image of my great-grandmother to comfort myself in that moment. I don't know. All I know is that it felt real. The softness of the landing, the warmth in my chest when I thought of her, the calmness that washed over me after that quick rush of fear. It felt like someone was there with me, helping me, telling me it was okay. Every time I think about that day, I can still see her face in my mind, smiling at me with that old wrinkled thumb raised in the air. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I feel my eyes getting warm and a small smile forming on my lips. I don't know what it was. Maybe I really did imagine it. But to me, it felt like she was there in that basement, catching me when I fell, just to give me one last thumbs up. I had been planning that trip for months. It was supposed to be just a peaceful solo weekend in the woods, away from work calls and city noise. I packed my old rucksack with 2 days' worth of food, my camp stove, sleeping bag, tarp, and a small tent. I checked everything twice because I hate being caught unprepared. Early on Friday morning, I left my apartment while it was still dark, drove for 3 hours, and parked my car on the gravel shoulder beside the dirt trail entrance. There were no other cars there, which felt nice because I wanted that emptiness. I locked my car, shouldered my bag, and started walking into the woods. The trail was wide and dry at first. Pine needles covered it in brown and orange layers, giving off that sharp, earthy smell that I always loved since childhood. The sun was rising, peeking through tree trunks. My boots crunched on gravel, bits mixed into the dirt. Birds chirped high above me. As I walked, the forest grew thicker. Twisted oak branches stretched overhead in places, creating shaded tunnels. It felt peaceful. My phone lost signal about 30 minutes in, and I turned it off to save battery. I had printed maps anyway. Around noon, I reached a small clearing with flat ground and a broken old picnic table made of gray wood, weathered from rain. That's where I set up my camp. I laid out my tarp, pitched my tent, rolled out my sleeping bag inside, and set my food bag aside. I ate a cold sandwich sitting on the picnic table, watching ants crawling across its cracked surface. After lunch, I decided to hike deeper along a narrow, unmarked trail just to explore. I didn't bring my whole pack, just a water bottle, my folding knife clipped to my pocket, and the map folded in my back pocket. The unmarked trail was lined with blackberry bushes that snagged at my pants. Spider webs stretched across it here and there, catching on my face. It twisted around dense clusters of trees. A few times, I had to duck under fallen branches. Eventually, it opened into another small clearing with a slight downhill slope. At the far end was an old fence made of rusted barbed wire strung between leaning wooden posts. Beyond that was a low marshy area filled with cattails and buzzing with insects. I stood at the fence for a long while, just listening. Dragonflies hovered over stagnant pools. Mosquitoes landed on my arms, and I slapped them away. I turned to head back to my camp when I noticed something odd. There was a narrow path beside the fence, probably used by deer, leading away into thicker brush. For some reason, I felt curious and followed it, pushing branches aside and stepping over rotting logs covered in fungus. It curved left and then right again. After about 5 minutes, it ended at a strange sight, a small abandoned shack half hidden behind pine trees. The shack was only about 8 feet by 10 feet. Its metal roof was rusted brown and caved in on one side. The walls were plywood patched with pieces of tin nailed haphazardly. There was a half-open door hanging from one hinge. I felt uneasy looking at it, like I was trespassing, even though it was clearly abandoned. The front had an old tire leaning against the wall and a broken plastic chair lying on its side. The ground was scattered with empty cans, mostly beer and old food tins, rusted through with holes. I felt an instinct to leave it alone, but I stepped closer and looked inside. The floor was dirt. A ripped blue tarp was spread out as if someone once slept there. Crushed cigarette butts littered a corner near a tiny burnout fire pit made of rocks. The smell was musty, like wet ashes and mold. There was an old camping pot on the ground with something dried and crusted inside it. I didn't want to look closer. I backed away and stood in the trees listening. The forest was silent except for buzzing flies. I felt a cold sweat building on my back. It was that creeping feeling you get when you know someone might have been there very recently. I forced myself to walk back to the fence, then back to the clearing, and followed the unmarked trail until I reached my main camp trail again. By the time I returned to my tent, the sun was dropping lower in the sky. I cooked noodles on my camp stove and ate them sitting on a rock. The silence of the forest felt heavy now. Every small sound carried so far in the evening air. A squirrel scrambling up a tree startled me. My hands were shaking a little from the leftover feeling of wrongness from that shack. I cleaned my dishes, packed everything into my food bag, and strung it high over a tree branch, far from my tent to keep it away from animals. I sat by the picnic table until it was dark, then crawled into my tent and zipped it shut. I lay there listening to the woods. Crickets chirped endlessly. A cool breeze moved across the nylon walls of my tent. I tried reading a paperback novel under my headlamp, but couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying that abandoned shack, the torn tarp, and that burnt smell. At some point, I drifted into shallow sleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still pitch black. Something snapped outside. A branch breaking. It was close, maybe 10 or 15 feet from my tent. I held my breath and listened. Leaves crunched. It wasn't a deer. The footsteps were too careful and too quiet, almost deliberate. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, my ears straining for each sound. I heard the noise move slowly around my tent, soft footsteps on pine needles. Then it stopped on the side where my tent door was. I felt a pulsing thud in my chest. I waited, hardly breathing, staring up at the black ceiling of my tent. For what felt like an hour, nothing happened. Then, another crunch of footsteps, moving away this time, fading into the forest. I stayed awake until dawn, clenching my folding knife in my fist. When sunlight finally filtered into the tent, I unzipped it and crawled out. The ground was covered in small pine cones and needles, disturbed in a faint trail leading from the edge of camp toward the main trail. I checked my food bag. It was untouched. I packed everything quickly, heart still pounding. I stuffed my sleeping bag and tent into my rucksack, doused the camp stove, grabbed my trash, and started walking back down the trail toward my car. My neck prickled the whole way. Every bird call or snapping twig made me flinch. It took me less than half the time to hike back. I didn't even pause to drink water. When I reached the gravel road, I saw my car sitting there alone under the trees, dusty and silent. I unlocked it with shaking hands, threw my bag into the passenger seat, and got in, slamming the door shut. As I pulled away from the trailhead, driving back down the narrow dirt road toward the highway, I felt an overwhelming relief, but also a sick dread in my gut. That shack, that burnt smell, and those careful footsteps circling my tent stayed with me for days. When I got home, I washed all my gear, aired out my sleeping bag, and stored everything away in the closet. For weeks, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that rotting shack in the shadows of the pine trees, hidden and silent, waiting for whoever walked by alone. I didn't go back to those woods again. Even now, when I think about camping alone, I see the shape of that shack behind my eyelids, and I remember the feeling of something, or someone silently walking around my tent in the dark. I know it was human, and knowing that makes it so much worse. I woke up earlier than usual that morning. The sun hadn't fully come up yet, and the room was still dark except for a bit of gray light coming through the blinds. I felt stiff from sleeping wrong, so I lay there for a while before finally deciding to get up. My phone was almost dead. I grabbed my charger, plugged it in, and sat there on the edge of my bed rubbing my eyes. I didn't really know what to do with my day. I didn't have work or anything planned. All I knew was that I wanted to get out of the house because I'd been feeling so restless lately. The walls in my apartment felt too close. After I got dressed and had some cereal, I put on my shoes and grabbed my old backpack. It still had my camping stove, small pot, and a folded-up tarp in it from my last trip. I didn't plan on staying out overnight, but I liked having it with me just in case. I filled up my water bottle, stuffed some protein bars in the side pocket, and headed out to my car. It was humid outside, even though it was early. The sun was coming up now, turning the clouds orange and pink. There was a smell of wet grass in the air. I felt a bit more awake as I got into the car and turned on the engine. It was a small beat-up hatchback, but it always got me where I needed to go. I drove out of town, passing empty sidewalks, dark shops, and quiet neighborhood streets until I reached the highway. I didn't have a real destination. I just kept driving east toward the hills. After about an hour, I turned off onto a smaller country road that twisted through farms and open fields. The windows were down, and the warm wind blew in, making the papers on my dashboard flutter. I saw a group of cows standing in a field chewing grass slowly, just staring at the road like they had nothing else in the world to think about. I kept going, passing old barns, collapsed sheds, and a few scattered houses sitting lonely behind their yards of dry brown grass. Eventually, I reached the edge of the forest. I remembered coming here once with some friends a few years back. There was a dirt trail that led into the woods and down to a creek. We'd cooked hot dogs there on flat rocks, and one of my friends had fallen in trying to cross a slippery log. That memory felt so far away now. I parked my car on the gravel turnout near the trailhead. No other cars were there. I sat for a bit, listening to the ticking sounds of my engine cooling down. The air smelled different here, like pine needles, earth, and something faintly rotten hidden deep under the forest floor. I got out, stretched my legs, pulled on my backpack, and locked the car. The trail started wide and flat. Dry leaves crunched under my shoes. I walked for a long time, just listening to my footsteps, the wind in the trees, and birds calling high above me. Some parts of the forest were so thick with brush that the air felt cooler, almost damp, like walking into a cave. I passed fallen trees covered in moss. I saw scratch marks on one old stump where some animal had sharpened its claws. The light streamed down in thin, bright shafts that moved slowly as the branches above swayed. After about an hour, I reached the creek. It was low, with brown water trickling between rocks and fallen branches. I sat down on a smooth boulder and took off my backpack. My shirt was sticking to my back with sweat, and I could feel my heartbeat in my temples. I drank water, listening to the quiet gurgle of the creek. There was no one else around. No distant voices, no footsteps, no cars. Just the forest and me. I decided to follow the creek upstream. I thought maybe I'd find a good place to sit and eat or dip my feet in. The bank was uneven and muddy in places. I slipped once, catching myself on a branch that bent almost to the ground under my weight. Bugs flew up around me every time I brushed through long grass. I kept going, feeling more alone the further I walked. After another 30 minutes, the creek curved into a narrow gully with steep sides. The air smelled stronger here, earthy and wet, with a faint hint of something sour like rotting leaves or an animal carcass somewhere nearby. I couldn't see anything dead, but I kept catching whiffs of it as I walked. The gully got deeper. The sides were taller than me now, so the creek bed felt like a hidden path under the earth. I kept walking, careful not to slip on the slick rocks. The smell grew stronger until it was almost making my stomach turn. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a pile of old sticks and mud tangled together. But as I got closer, I saw the shape of fur, limbs bent at wrong angles, dark patches of dried blood around its neck. It was a deer. A young one, probably a year old, maybe less. Its eyes were gone, and its stomach had been ripped open. Flies were crawling all over it, and the smell was so strong it felt like a physical thing pushing into my nose. I stepped back quickly, almost slipping into the creek. I felt a strange coldness wash over me. I looked around, suddenly aware of how silent everything was. No birds were singing anymore. No rustling in the bushes. Just the faint buzzing of flies around the carcass. I turned and started walking back down the creek, feeling my skin crawling with the urge to get away. As I moved quickly, my feet splashed in the shallow water, and I stumbled over slippery stones. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following me. I didn't know what had killed the deer. It could have been coyotes, but the deep claw marks on its side made me think of something bigger. A mountain lion maybe. I'd read about attacks before. They stalk quietly, waiting and watching for a chance to pounce. The trail back to where I'd left my backpack felt longer than before. My chest felt tight, and I kept wiping sweat from my forehead. When I finally reached my backpack, I grabbed it and kept moving down the trail toward my car without stopping to drink or rest. The forest felt different now. Each rustle of leaves or snapping twig made my heart jump. I tried to walk quietly, scanning the trees around me, looking for any movement, any flash of tawny fur or a long tail. At one point, I heard a faint sound up ahead, a low growl, so quiet I thought maybe I imagined it. I froze, holding my breath. My ears felt hot, and I could hear my own blood rushing. The sound came again, this time from behind me, a soft thudding of something moving on the forest floor. I turned slowly. I didn't see anything at first. Then I saw a shape between two thick pines about 20 feet away. It was low to the ground, almost blending into the shadows, but I could see two eyes staring right at me, golden and steady, unblinking. I didn't move. My legs felt like stone. My hands were shaking, and I felt my stomach tighten so hard I thought I would throw up. The eyes watched me for what felt like minutes, though it was probably only a few seconds. Then the shape shifted, and I saw the outline of its head, pointed ears, long, sleek body. It was a mountain lion. It was crouched low, muscles tense like it was deciding whether to lunge at me or let me go. I remembered reading once that you shouldn't run from a mountain lion. You should make yourself look bigger. I raised my arms slowly, but they felt so heavy I could barely lift them above my shoulders. I tried to stand taller, but my knees were shaking. The lion didn't move. It just kept staring at me with those empty golden eyes. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like it echoed through the forest. After what felt like forever, it shifted its weight, turned its head slightly, and then backed away into the trees without a sound. I stood there, still frozen, staring at the place it had disappeared. The forest was silent again. I lowered my arms and felt them trembling. My chest hurt from holding my breath for so long. I started walking again, this time moving as quietly as I could while still keeping a fast pace. When I finally saw the gravel road through the trees, I almost cried. My car sat there, alone in the silent lot. I ran the last few steps, unlocked the door with shaking fingers, and got in. I locked the doors, even though I knew it couldn't open them. I sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing. My whole body felt like it was buzzing with leftover fear. My throat was dry, and my head felt light. I drove away without looking back, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The road felt narrower than before. Every shadow looked like an animal waiting to cross. When I got to the highway, I felt a bit better. Cars passed me going the other way, and each one made me feel more grounded, like I was returning to the world of people and safety. Back at home, I sat on my couch for a long time without turning on the TV or lights. I kept thinking about those golden eyes watching me from the shadows, that silent decision it made to let me go. I knew I was lucky. If it had wanted to, it could have ended my life right there in the quiet, hidden place where no one would find me for days. That night, I lay in bed with the blinds open. I stared out at the dark sky, thinking about how close I had come to dying, about how thin the line is between being alive and being dead. Just a few steps, a few seconds, a few decisions made by something watching from the trees. In the morning, I felt different. I made coffee and sat on the porch watching people walk their dogs and kids ride their bikes down the street. I felt grateful, but also unsettled. The forest wasn't just a peaceful place for walks or camping or escaping the noise of town. It was its own world, with its own rules, where things hunt and things die and no one knows or cares. I realized I had always thought of myself as something separate from that, but I wasn't. Out there, I was just another animal walking alone in the trees. And that thought never left me. Even now, when I go hiking, I keep glancing into the shadows, looking for golden eyes watching from between the trees. Because I know they're there. And one day, it might not let me go. I woke up early that morning with a heavy feeling in my chest. It wasn't anything supernatural, or some gut instinct telling me not to go. I was just tired. I had been working 6 days a week for the past 2 months, trying to save up for a used car since mine had broken down again. I was exhausted, but it was my only day off that week, and my friend had planned a hiking trip into the backcountry area a few hours away. He had bailed at the last minute because he caught a cold, but I didn't want to waste the plan on my only day off, so I decided to go alone. I packed my old hiking backpack with a few granola bars, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, and a bag of tortilla chips. I filled up my metal water bottle and stuffed it in the side pocket. I didn't pack anything fancy because I was planning to be back before sunset. The trail I chose wasn't too long, just about 5 miles each way, and it ended at a quiet little lake up in the hills. I liked going there when I was stressed. No cell service. No noise except birds, insects, and the wind moving through the leaves. The drive there was easy. I parked in the empty gravel lot at the trailhead and stretched my legs before heading off. The air was still cool from the night, and the sky was clear. I could feel the sun slowly warming the earth. The first mile was easy, mostly flat. I walked fast, feeling my body loosen up as I moved. My shoulders stopped aching from work, my neck relaxed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. After about an hour and a half, I reached the lake. It looked exactly the same as always. Perfectly still water reflecting the green hills around it. A fallen tree stretched out into the water, bleached white from sun and rain over the years. There were dragonflies hovering around the reeds near the shore, and I saw a frog jump off a rock into the water, making quiet ripples. I sat down on a flat rock near the edge, took off my shoes, and dipped my feet in. The water was freezing, sending little shocks of pain up my legs at first, but then it felt good. I sat there eating peanut butter with a spoon, staring at the water. Time passed slowly. I didn't check my watch. I didn't want to know. After a while, clouds started moving in, covering the sun. I didn't think much of it. The weather app said there wouldn't be rain until late evening. I put my shoes back on, packed up my trash, and started heading back. The trail was quiet. I didn't see a single person all day. About a mile into my return hike, I heard something moving in the bushes to my right. I stopped walking and listened. It was a heavy sound, not like a bird hopping or a squirrel scratching around. It was deeper. I couldn't see what it was through the thick green leaves. I stood there for a while, trying to figure out what to do. My heart was beating fast, but I told myself it was probably just a deer. I kept walking, moving a little faster. The sound in the bushes moved along with me for a bit, then stopped. After a few minutes, I calmed down again. I walked another half-mile before I heard it again, this time behind me. I turned around quickly, but the trail was empty. The trees on both sides were thick. I couldn't see more than 20 or 30 feet into them. My pulse was fast now, and my breathing felt shallow. I told myself to keep walking. I kept my head down, focusing on the dirt path and the fallen pine needles. I didn't hear anything for a while. Then, suddenly, I heard footsteps on the trail behind me. They were quiet, but I heard them. They stopped when I stopped. I turned around, but the trail was empty again. No birds were chirping anymore. The whole forest felt quiet and still. I started walking faster. My ankles were starting to hurt from the uneven ground, but I didn't care. I just wanted to reach my car. Every few steps, I glanced behind me, but there was never anything there. The clouds above me grew darker, blocking out most of the light. It felt like dusk, even though it was only early afternoon. Then I heard it again, this time louder. Footsteps, quick and heavy. I spun around and finally saw movement. There was a man standing on the trail behind me. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood up and faded blue jeans. His shoes were old and dirty, and his hands were hanging loosely at his sides. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me. I couldn't see his face clearly because the hood cast a shadow over it, but I could see enough to know he was watching me closely. I didn't move. My chest felt tight, and my knees felt weak. I didn't know what to do. After what felt like a full minute, I turned around and started walking again. I didn't want to run because I didn't want him to know how scared I was. I just walked as fast as I could without breaking into a run. I could hear his footsteps behind me again, matching my pace. Every time I sped up, he sped up too. I didn't turn around again. I kept my eyes on the trail ahead. My throat felt dry, and my shoulders were tense and aching. The trees started to thin out, and I knew I was close to the trailhead. I could see the sky opening up above the gravel parking lot. I kept walking fast, trying not to stumble over rocks or roots. When I stepped out into the clearing, I finally turned around. He was standing at the edge of the trees, half hidden by the shadows. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me. I quickly walked to my car, fumbling with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped them once onto the gravel. I picked them up and unlocked the door, opening it as fast as I could. I got inside, shut the door, and locked it. I started the engine, my fingers trembling on the ignition. I looked up at the trees, but he was gone. I didn't see him anywhere. I sat there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to calm down. The parking lot was still empty. It felt like the whole world had gone quiet. I drove away without looking back. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. I didn't feel safe until I was miles away, back on the main highway with other cars around me. Even then, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that black hooded figure sitting in the back seat or driving behind me. When I got home, I locked all the doors and windows, even though it was the middle of the day. I took a shower and sat on my bed, feeling the water drying in my hair and my chest still tight with fear. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. I just kept thinking about how quiet the forest was, how there were no birds singing or leaves rustling when he was following me. I kept thinking about how he didn't say anything, not one word, not one sound, just footsteps behind me and that silent staring. I didn't go hiking alone for a long time after that. I kept replaying it in my mind, thinking about what would have happened if I tripped or fell, if I had taken longer to find my keys, if my car hadn't started on the first try. I thought about how no one knew I was there that day. If something had happened, it would have taken days for anyone to find me. Life went on as usual, but I never felt as safe again in the woods as I did before. I realized that danger doesn't always come with a warning or a reason. Sometimes it's just a man standing silently in the forest, watching you walk away, and choosing not to follow you all the way out. That was the worst part. He didn't have to run or chase me. He knew that fear alone would follow me home for the rest of my life. I didn't plan to stay out there that late. I had left the house around 5 in the evening to go on a short walk through the hills behind my neighborhood. I usually walked that loop, down the cracked concrete path by the old reservoir, then along the bottom of the hills where the ground turned into packed dirt, then up the dry slopes dotted with scraggly bushes and eucalyptus trees. It was supposed to take only an hour and a half at most, even if I sat at the ridge to watch the sunset. But that day I felt restless. I walked faster than usual, then stopped at the top and just sat down in the dirt for a while. I remember picking at the dry grass beside me, breaking the stalks in half, rolling little pebbles in my fingers. I kept looking out at the hazy pink sky, feeling the warmth fade from my skin as the sun dipped lower. A slight breeze came over the ridge. It smelled like dust and the faint sweetness of the eucalyptus leaves that rattled above my head. When I finally stood up, it was already getting dark. I felt a small stab of worry in my chest because I didn't have a flashlight, only my phone with about 40% battery. I shook it off. I knew these hills well. All I had to do was follow the narrow dirt trail back down, cross the dry creek bed, and walk up the slope to where the reservoir path would appear again. I set off, feeling the gravel crunch under my old running shoes. As I started down the first slope, the last light faded behind the western ridge. Shadows spread out between the trees. The trail was still visible, but everything around it melted into dark shapes. I heard the steady buzz of insects and the occasional rustle of a lizard or rabbit moving through the brush. I walked for a while without thinking about anything, just watching the dusty trail appear and disappear under my feet. After about 15 minutes, I noticed it was darker than I expected. I pulled out my phone and turned on the screen. The brightness blinded me for a moment, showing me the time, 7:59 p.m. Later than I thought. I turned on the flashlight, shining it down the trail. The narrow white beam showed the dirt path and the twisted roots sticking up along its edges. I kept going, telling myself there was nothing to worry about. The night air grew colder, brushing over my sweaty arms and neck. As I walked, I felt my shoulders tighten. Every sound felt louder. The clicking of insects, the dry leaves rattling high up, the creaking of the eucalyptus trunks as they shifted slightly in the breeze. I walked faster. I reached the point where the trail dropped into the creek bed. During spring it was a shallow stream, but this late in summer it was completely dry. I slid down the slope, little rocks shifting under my feet. My shoes hit the flat bottom of the creek bed with a dull thump. I shone my light ahead. The far side rose up in a steeper slope. The trail continued up and over it. I sighed and started walking forward, my flashlight showing the smooth stones scattered across the dry creek bottom. Halfway across, I heard something behind me. At first I thought it was just another leaf falling, or a branch creaking in the breeze. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like a small scrape, like a shoe brushing against rock. I stopped walking and held my breath. The insects hummed loudly around me. I listened as hard as I could, feeling my pulse hammering in my throat. Nothing, just silence, except the faint wind rattling the trees far above the creek bed. I told myself it was probably an animal, a possum or stray cat, and kept walking. But I couldn't stop thinking about that sound. I tried to walk faster, but the loose rocks made it hard. I stumbled once, my toe catching under a flat stone, almost falling onto my knees. My phone wobbled in my grip, and I felt a jolt of panic imagining it slipping from my hand and smashing against the rocks, leaving me blind in the dark. I gripped it tighter and kept moving. When I reached the base of the slope leading out of the creek bed, I felt relief rising in my chest. I climbed up carefully, grabbing at tufts of dry grass to pull myself along. When I reached the top, I turned around and shone my light back across the creek bed. The beam flicked across the rocks and dry dirt, catching nothing but emptiness and darkness. I let out a shaky breath. My hands felt cold and clammy. I turned back to the trail and kept walking. The dirt felt harder under my shoes now, packed down by years of hikers and runners. I followed it up a slight incline. The air smelled sharper here, like cracked drywood mixed with dust. My flashlight caught the twisted trunks of trees, branches reaching out in crooked arms above my head. That was when I heard the sound again. Behind me, but closer this time. A shuffle on the trail. Not an animal. Too heavy. Too deliberate. I felt my stomach clench up, so tight it almost hurt. I stopped, turned around slowly, shining the light down the trail behind me. The beam lit up the dirt path, the leaning bushes, the trees standing silent and still. I didn't see anything, but I kept the light there, my arm starting to ache from holding it out. I listened, every muscle in my body tense. There was only silence. I swallowed hard, tasting dry dust in my mouth. I turned back and started walking again, trying to keep my steps quiet so I could hear better. But the ground crunched under my feet, no matter how lightly I stepped. Every step felt like it echoed off the hills around me. I felt exposed. My back prickled with a crawling sensation, as if someone was walking right behind me, matching my steps exactly. I kept turning around, shining the light back down the trail. Each time, nothing was there. Just the empty path stretching into blackness. But each time I turned, I felt like whatever was following me stopped too, standing just outside the beam of light. My breathing grew shallow and fast. I started thinking about what it could be. I didn't want to imagine another person out here. A person would be worse than any animal. I pictured a man in dark clothes, staying just out of sight, following silently until he was close enough to grab me. I felt a wave of nausea rise up my throat. I started walking faster, almost jogging now, my shoes scuffing the ground, my light bouncing wildly with each step. The branches overhead blurred past in crooked shapes. The cold air burned in my chest as I sucked it in and forced myself to keep moving. I thought about calling someone, but who? And what would I say? I'm being followed. By who? I don't know. Where are you? Somewhere in the hills. I felt stupid and helpless, and I hated it. I just kept walking, focusing on getting back to the reservoir path. I rounded a curve in the trail and saw the faint gray shape of the chain-link fence that lined the path around the reservoir. Relief flooded through me so strong I almost cried. I stumbled up the last slope, clambering onto the cracked concrete path. The streetlights along the edge of the reservoir cast a dim, orange glow over the ground, breaking up the darkness. I turned around, shining my light one last time down the trail. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. I felt eyes on me, watching from somewhere just beyond where the light reached. I stood there for a moment, my chest heaving, the cold sweat soaking the back of my shirt. Then I turned off my flashlight and started walking down the concrete path toward home. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, but I never saw anyone, just the empty hills rising into darkness. When I finally got home, I locked the door behind me and went straight to the kitchen to drink a glass of water. My hands were trembling, so hard I almost dropped the glass. I felt drained, like all my muscles had turned into rubber. I sat down at the table, staring at my phone lying in front of me, the screen still glowing faintly with the low battery warning. That night I lay in bed with the curtains open, staring out at the dark hills in the distance. I kept thinking about the sound of footsteps behind me. I knew what I heard. It wasn't an animal. I don't know who it was or what they wanted, but I know there was someone out there following me, staying hidden, waiting for something. Maybe they realized I reached the lights and gave up. Or maybe they walked back down into the creek bed to wait for the next person who stayed out too late. All I know is that I've never gone back there after dark again. Now, when I go walking, I make sure to leave hours before sunset. Every time I pass the spot where I first heard those footsteps, I feel that tightness in my chest again, the prickling on the back of my neck, the certainty that someone is standing just out of sight, watching, waiting. It never goes away. And I know deep down that whoever it was is still out there somewhere, moving through the shadows, silent and patient as the darkness itself. This happened just a few years ago, when I was still engaged in a trade many of you would frown on. I don't know how to explain it to someone who has never been desperate. When you're young and you need money, and someone offers it for something you already know you can do well, you start thinking it's not that bad. I was good at making people feel comfortable. I was good at making them feel seen. And I liked it, or at least that's what I told myself. I was tall, built from years of playing basketball and lifting heavy stuff at home, and people always said I looked intimidating when I walked into a room. But when I smiled, they said I looked gentle. That combination worked well in what I did. Most clients were straightforward. Some were lonely men in nice clothes with fat wallets who only wanted me to talk to them while they cried about their wives. Some wanted massages, some wanted sex, some wanted me to pretend to care. I did care in my own way. I never had any problem with most of them. I was solicitous, nice to the extreme, and I knew how to keep my boundaries clear but soft, so they didn't feel rejected. That's what you learn early on. People pay you, yes, but it's the illusion that matters. This man was different from the start. I didn't know it then, but he was about to become one of the darkest transactions I ever had. I only played this particular game once, and I never intended to play it again. He was recommended to me by a friend in the trade, a friend who was older, who looked out for me like an older brother. He told me the gentleman paid well and liked to keep things quiet, and that he was kind, generous with gifts, never violent. That's all you need to hear when your rent is due, your fridge is empty, and your phone bill is waiting for top-up. I remember that day clearly. The weather was hot, but his place was so cold inside I felt goosebumps on my arms when I entered. His house was huge, with wide marble floors and empty walls with big paintings in dark wood frames. He met me in the front room, wearing a dark gray robe that looked expensive. He smelled of strong cologne, something musky and old-fashioned. His eyes were calm, dark, and heavy-lidded, like he never slept enough. He smiled when he saw me, a small, polite smile, and told me I looked even better in person. He asked me if I was hungry or thirsty. I said no out of habit, because you never accept drinks or food from strangers, but he insisted with such courtesy that I felt rude refusing. He gestured to the kitchen where a tray was waiting on the counter. There was orange juice in a tall glass, and a sandwich cut into neat halves. My stomach growled then, because I hadn't eaten all day except for a packet of chips in the morning. I remember that moment clearly because his eyes flicked to my stomach when it growled, and he smiled again, like he enjoyed seeing me vulnerable. So I ate. I drank the juice. It tasted sweet and cold. He watched me eat, and I felt a little embarrassed, but told myself it was normal. Some men liked watching you eat because it felt domestic to them. After that, he asked me to follow him to his bedroom for the massage he booked me for. I didn't see anything wrong yet, though I was starting to feel warm inside, like a slow build of heat under my skin. Maybe it was the food. Maybe it was the air conditioning blowing cold on my skin. I didn't think about it much. His bedroom was large, carpeted, with tall windows covered by thick curtains that let almost no light in. It smelled faintly of candle wax and something metallic. The bed was covered in white sheets, and on top of that were thick, clear plastic sheets that crinkled when I touched them. There was more plastic tucked under the bed edges. I thought it was odd. Usually if someone wants play, they tell you before so you can prepare by drinking lots of water. The sheets are usually on the floor, not on the bed, but I shrugged it off. Some clients were particular about oils and lotions staining their expensive mattresses. I didn't question it. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened a big dark wood box he brought out from his dresser. He placed it on the small table by the bed, between two lit candles. I didn't look inside. I thought maybe it was personal items, toys, lube, whatever. Nothing surprised me anymore. I got the massage oil from my bag, took off my shirt, and told him to lie down. When he undressed, I saw his scars. For such a rich, refined-looking man, his body was marked like an old fighter's. Long white lines crisscrossed his back and shoulders. Deep, thick scars puckered across his chest. Small, round scars dotted his arms. It didn't look like surgery scars. They looked like burns and slashes that healed badly. He was hairless, his skin pale and thin. I wondered if he was offering more than the usual fee because of shame. Some men hated being touched because of scars, and they paid extra for reassurance that you wouldn't flinch. I didn't flinch. I massaged him with slow, steady pressure. My hands worked across his shoulders, down his back, into his lower spine, feeling the tension there. He didn't speak. He only breathed deep and slow, like he was meditating. I worked on him for an hour. My arms were sore by the end, because he was tall and wide, with thick muscle under his thin skin. I could feel his heart beating under my palms, and that made me feel a bit dizzy, like the warmth in my body was climbing higher. When I finished, I wiped my hands with a towel and reached for the lotion bottle to finish him off. That was how it usually went. A massage, then a release, then money, then goodbye. I straddled his thighs and bent down to lick his neck while stroking him lightly to wake him up for it. His skin tasted clean but a little metallic with sweat. But he wasn't hard. He didn't react. Instead, he reached to his side and opened that big dark wood box. I glanced inside this time. There were knives, shiny and clean, with polished wood or bone handles, arranged in neat rows on black velvet. There were other things too: hooks, clamps, tiny bottles with black liquid, coiled ropes of thin leather. I felt a flicker of fear then, because I'd never seen anyone keep things like that. It wasn't sex toys. It was something else. He lifted one of the knives and placed it against my forearm, not pressing, just letting the cold blade sit there. My skin erupted in goosebumps. The room felt even colder, and my head felt hot and light at the same time. He took his other hand and ran his thumb down my cheek, slow, deliberate. I felt my throat go dry. My instincts were screaming at me to get off him, grab my bag, and run, but I couldn't move. My arms felt heavy. My chest felt tight. Then he started telling me what he wanted. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He spoke calmly, like he was describing an art piece he wanted to buy. He was persuasive. He said I would be safe, that he would pay me triple my rate, that he just wanted to see my blood. Not to kill me, he said, just to see it. He wanted to cut shallow lines on my skin while he finished himself. That was all. He said it in such a matter-of-fact way that I felt my fear turn into something else. I was terrified, yes, but the heat in my body spread everywhere, and I hated myself for feeling turned on. I kept thinking, why does this scare me so much, but also make my chest feel tight in a good way? I wanted to throw up at myself for even feeling that. He pressed the blade lightly into my arm, just enough to make a thin red line appear. The sting was small but sharp, like a paper cut. He sighed, a deep sound from his chest, and his eyes closed like he was in bliss. He moved the knife slowly, making another small cut, then another, parallel lines down my arm. He wasn't shaking. His hands were steady. My breath came fast and shallow, and the room spun a little. I think he drugged me. It felt too intense, too bright and unreal. My blood beaded up and slid down my skin, warm against the cold room. He finished himself quickly after that. He didn't touch me sexually. He just held my wrist with the cuts facing him while he stroked himself with the other hand, his eyes half-lidded, mouth open slightly. He came with a shiver and a sigh, and for a moment I felt relief. Relief that he was done. Relief that he didn't cut deeper. Relief that I was still alive. When it was over, he cleaned my cuts with cold water and a soft cloth. He bandaged them carefully, like he cared about my comfort, and gave me painkillers and antibiotic cream to take home. Then he handed me a thick envelope with cash, thicker than any I'd ever received, and walked me to the door. As I left his house, the world outside felt too bright, too loud. My arms stung under the bandages, and I kept looking at people walking past me, wondering if they could see the blood on me. I got home and sat under the shower for a long time, watching the water run pink down the drain. For weeks after that, I felt wrong inside, like there was something rotten growing in my chest. Part of me wanted to do it again. Part of me felt sick just remembering the feeling. I kept thinking about his face, the way his eyes closed when he saw my blood, how calm and happy he looked. I wondered what else he would have done if I had stayed longer, or if he ever felt the urge to go deeper with someone else. I moved to a distant city after that. I told myself it was for a fresh start, but really I think I was running away from the part of me that felt alive when that knife cut my skin. My friend contacted me about 3 months later. He said the gentleman was looking for me again, that it would be all expenses paid, flights, hotels, food, plus double my previous rate. I almost said yes. I remember sitting on my small bed in my new rented room, staring at my phone, feeling that dark heat rise in my body again. I kept imagining the cold knife, the thin lines of blood, his size. But something felt wrong, like there was a dark doorway that would close behind me forever if I stepped through again. I told my friend I wasn't available, that I quit, that I moved away and started new work. He kept trying to persuade me, telling me how much money I was throwing away, how the gentleman would even travel to my city if I agreed. But I kept refusing. My refusals became more blunt each time, until he stopped asking. Sometimes I woke up early that morning with a headache that felt like a tight band around my forehead. The sun had just started to shine through the thin cotton curtains in our small bedroom, painting pale orange streaks across the wooden floorboards. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, letting my eyes adjust, feeling the quietness of the house press against me. My husband, Alan, was still lying under the sheets, his breathing deep and even. I stood up slowly, feeling a slight ache in my knees from years of standing and walking and working, and I slipped my feet into my slippers. I walked down the hallway towards the kitchen, my slippers making a soft whispering sound against the lino floor. I switched on the kettle and stood by the window while it boiled, looking out at the back garden. The grass needed cutting, and the edges of the lawn near the little stone path were overgrown with weeds that curled up towards the morning sun. I made myself a cup of tea and sipped it slowly, feeling the warmth travel down my chest and settle in my stomach. I didn't bother with breakfast. I never really felt hungry in the mornings. Tea was enough to get me going. By 8, I was dressed and ready to leave. I wore a navy blue skirt that fell just below my knees and a cream blouse with little blue flowers printed all over it. I picked up my purse from the dresser by the door and slipped on my black leather shoes, the ones with the low heel that didn't make my feet ache too badly after a day out. Alan called out from the bedroom, his voice muffled by the sheets, asking where I was going. I told him I was off to town to do the shopping and run a few errands before it got busy. He just hummed in response, half asleep. Outside, the air was cool but smelled faintly of summer flowers blooming in the small front gardens along the street. The sky was a soft pale blue, washed out by the early sun, with a few white streaks of cloud drifting lazily above. I walked down the driveway, listening to the birds chirping high up in the hedges. As I walked towards the bus stop, I passed by Mrs. Black's house. Her small front garden was neatly kept, as it always had been, with bright marigolds planted along the narrow flower bed under her front window. I glanced at the house but didn't see her outside, so I kept walking, holding my purse tightly under my arm. The bus came quickly. I climbed up the steps and found a seat by the window near the middle. The bus was nearly empty except for 2 old men in the front, talking in low voices about the football scores from the weekend, and a young mother with her child sitting near the back. I watched the streets roll by as we drove towards town. We passed the row of terraced houses near the old mill, then the open field where children sometimes played football in the evenings, then the corner shop with its faded red sign and dusty windows. When the bus reached town, I stood up slowly and stepped off, feeling the pavement firm under my feet. The town center was starting to come alive. Shopkeepers were pulling up their metal shutters and propping open their doors. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery down the road, mixing with the faint scent of car exhausts. I made my way down the street, walking past the post office and towards the market square. The ground was covered in small gray bricks that were worn smooth from years of people walking over them. I went into the greengrocer's first. The smell of ripe bananas and earthy potatoes filled my nose as soon as I stepped inside. I picked out a small brown paper bag and started filling it with apples, checking each one for bruises. I moved down the aisles slowly, picking out potatoes, carrots, onions, and a small punnet of strawberries that looked bright and fresh. After paying, I walked out, the weight of the shopping bag pulling slightly on my arm. Next, I went into the butcher's. The little brass bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. It smelled of raw meat and sawdust, a smell I had grown up with and never minded. I bought a small joint of beef for Sunday dinner and some sausages for Alan's breakfasts. The butcher, Mr. Henderson, wrapped everything neatly in brown paper and tied it with string, the way he always did. I tucked it into my shopping bag and nodded goodbye to him before leaving. After that, I went into the chemist to pick up some paracetamol for my headaches and a small bottle of cough medicine just to keep in the cupboard. I like to be prepared. Then I stopped at the bakery, buying a loaf of crusty white bread still warm from the oven and 2 small iced buns as a treat for later. My shopping bag felt heavy now, so I decided I'd done enough and should head home before it got too hot. As I walked out of the bakery and turned towards the bus stop, I saw Mrs. Black kneeling in her front garden, pulling up weeds near her marigolds. She wore a pale blue cardigan over a floral dress, and her gray hair was tied back in a neat bun. Her small wire-framed glasses sat low on her nose as she looked down at the weeds she was pulling. I stopped in front of her little wooden gate and watched her for a moment, feeling the warm sun on my face and the breeze lifting the ends of my hair. I thought I should say hello. It would be rude not to. She always liked a quick chat. I called out her name softly, and she looked up, pushing her glasses up her nose with a soil-stained finger. I told her she was working hard today, and she nodded, wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist. She didn't stand up, just carried on pulling at the stubborn weeds. I asked her how she'd been keeping, and she mumbled something about her back aching, but that she couldn't stand to see the garden overgrown. I nodded and told her it looked lovely, as it always did. She smiled faintly and said it was nice to keep busy, that it kept her mind calm. I didn't stay long. I said I'd best be off, that I had to get home to put the meat in the fridge before it spoiled. She nodded again, her eyes still focused on the weeds she was pulling, and I turned away, walking towards the bus stop. The bus came within minutes, and I climbed on, feeling slightly tired from carrying the heavy shopping bag. When I got home, the house felt cool and quiet. Alan was sitting in his armchair by the window, reading the newspaper with his glasses perched low on his nose. He asked how town had been, and I told him it was busy but fine. I set the shopping bag down on the kitchen table and started unpacking everything, putting the meat into the fridge and the fruit into the bowl on the counter. Alan asked me if I'd seen anyone on the way home, and I told him yes, that I saw Mrs. Black out in her garden, pulling up weeds. I told him she looked well, though she said her back was aching a bit. Alan lowered his newspaper slowly and looked at me over the top of his glasses. His face went pale, and he blinked at me for a long moment, like he was trying to understand what I had just said. Then he said, his voice sounding small and thin, that we'd been to Mrs. Black's funeral 2 weeks ago. I just stood there with the loaf of bread still in my hand, feeling like the floor had tilted under my feet. I could hear the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall and the sound of a car passing by outside, but everything felt distant and muffled. I put the bread down on the table and gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. I felt dizzy, like I might faint. Alan kept staring at me, his mouth slightly open, the newspaper slipping from his lap onto the carpet. I shook my head slowly, trying to make sense of it. I told myself he must have misunderstood, that he was mistaken, that it was someone else's funeral we went to. But as I stood there, I started to remember it clearly. The small wooden church, the rows of flowers, the way her children cried as they lowered the coffin into the ground. My legs felt weak, and I pulled out a chair and sat down, pressing my hand against my chest. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, moving around the house like I was underwater. Every small sound felt too loud, the kettle boiling, the fridge humming, the tap dripping into the sink. I kept thinking back to seeing her in the garden, the way her cardigan looked in the sun, the soil on her fingers, the faint smile she gave me when I told her the flowers looked lovely. It felt so real. I could still hear her voice in my head, soft and quiet, talking about how gardening kept her mind calm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake next to Alan, listening to his slow breathing, staring up at the dark ceiling. I kept trying to replay the morning in my head, thinking about each moment, each step I took, each person I saw. I wondered if I had just imagined it, if it was someone else who looked like her, or if my mind had played a trick on me because I missed seeing her out in her garden like she always used to be. I thought about going back there the next day to see for myself, but the idea made my stomach twist into tight knots. In the morning, I sat at the kitchen table, drinking my tea slowly, watching the steam curl up into the pale light coming through the window. Alan didn't say anything about it. He just read his newspaper in silence. I didn't mention it either. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, feeling tired and heavy, listening to the birds chirping outside and the sound of a distant lawnmower starting up. I never saw her again after that day. Every time I walked past her house, I would glance at the garden, half expecting to see her there, kneeling in the soil with her little trowel in hand. But it stayed empty, the marigolds slowly wilting under the summer sun, the weeds creeping back up between the flowers. I started taking a different route to the bus stop, walking down the other side of the street, so I wouldn't have to look at her house. It made my chest ache to see it, the windows closed, the curtains drawn tight. Over time, I tried to push it to the back of my mind. I told myself that memory plays tricks on us, that grief can cloud the edges of what we think we see. But even now, when I think back to that morning, I can still feel the warmth of the sun on my face, smell the fresh bread from the bakery, and see her kneeling there in her blue cardigan, her hair tied back neatly, her small glasses perched low on her nose as she pulled up the weeds in her garden. I don't know what it was that I saw that day. Maybe it was just my mind trying to hold on to Years ago, I used to work at a church as the head sound engineer. It wasn't exactly the job people dream about when they're kids, but it was steady work, and I liked it. Most of the time, it was simple enough. Sundays were busy, of course, with all the services and people pouring in and out. There were always little kids running around after the service ended, people chatting in small circles, old men carrying thick Bibles under their arms with worn leather covers. During weekdays, though, the place was quiet. I would come in to fix cables, test microphones, replace batteries in the wireless packs, and set things up for the next service or the worship band practice. Sometimes I'd just sit there, up in the sound booth balcony, with all the lights off, looking down at the empty sanctuary below, thinking about whatever was on my mind that day. A good chunk of my job involved duplicating CDs of sermons. Back then, people still wanted CDs, so if they missed a sermon, they'd request copies. Some folks ordered entire series if they were out of town for a month or two. It took time. The duplicator machine was fast enough, but with multiple discs, you had to sit there feeding them in and out, labeling them, packing them into the little white sleeves, and placing them in the labeled boxes so they could be picked up later in the week. Since I was a night owl, I often went in after midnight to do this. No one was there to interrupt me. I could work at my own pace, and it was peaceful. That particular night, I remember the air felt hot and heavy when I stepped out of my car in the parking lot around 1 a.m. It had been humid all day, and the darkness didn't cool it off. There was a faint breeze rustling the trees near the sidewalk, and the smell of the pavement still held the day's heat. I carried my small black backpack over my shoulder with a few snacks, my old thermos of coffee, and my CD labels and markers. I unlocked the big glass front doors. They were heavy, and as they swung open, the familiar smell of the church greeted me. It was a mix of carpet cleaner, coffee, and the faint woody smell of the old pews. I stepped inside and let the door close behind me, hearing the click echo through the empty foyer. I didn't bother turning the lights on. I never did. The street lights outside shone just enough through the windows that I could see where I was going. Besides, after working there for years, I could walk that place blindfolded and never hit a pew. I made my way across the foyer, past the wooden information counter and the little coffee house area with its darkened espresso machine and glass pastry case. My shoes squeaked softly on the tile, echoing through the empty space. I reached the door that led up to the balcony and pushed it open. The metal handle was cool under my fingers. I started up the stairs, running my hand along the painted wooden railing as I climbed. My breath was slightly heavier from the heat and the climb, and I could hear it echoing softly in the dark stairwell. At the top, I reached the balcony landing and stepped into the sound booth. I flipped on the small light above the duplicator station. It was a single bulb in a metal fixture about 15 feet above my head. It cast a narrow yellow circle of light onto the duplicator machine, the table, and a few feet around me. Beyond that small pool of light, everything else was swallowed in darkness. I could see down into the sanctuary below, faintly illuminated by the light behind me. Rows and rows of pews stretching out, the stage, the wooden cross mounted against the back wall, and everything else sat there silently, empty and shadowed. I set my bag down on the chair, took out the blank CDs, labels, and marker, and sat down to work. I opened the duplicator and began inserting discs. The machine whirred softly, the small green LED display blinking as it read the master disc, and began burning the first copies. I took a sip of my coffee. It was still warm, and the bitter taste was comforting in that cool, silent room. Time passed slowly. I fell into my routine, inserting discs, labeling finished ones, stacking them in neat piles. The duplicator's hum was the only sound, apart from my breathing and the occasional creak of the old wooden balcony railing when I shifted in my chair. After about an hour, I remember leaning back and stretching my arms above my head. My neck cracked softly. I rubbed my eyes and glanced down at the sanctuary below, just letting my gaze wander across the shadowy rows of pews. That's when I heard it. Clink, clink. It was faint but clear. My ears perked up immediately. The sound came from down below, about 20 or 30 feet ahead, and slightly to the left of where I was sitting. It echoed slightly in the big open room. I froze, listening. The sound repeated again. Clink. I knew that sound. After so many years working there, it was a familiar background noise. Every Sunday, people carried their ceramic coffee mugs from the little coffee house area into the sanctuary. Sometimes they forgot them under pews. During cleanup, The volunteers would go around collecting mugs, holding several by the handles in one hand, and the mugs would bump together with that exact clinking sound. But this was 2 a.m. There were no volunteers here. No one walking around collecting mugs. I sat there, still and silent, listening hard. My ears felt like they were reaching into the darkness, straining for any hint of movement. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe the air conditioning kicked on and moved something, but the AC was off. I would have heard its low hum. Maybe it was the building settling. But buildings don't settle with the sound of ceramic mugs clinking together. Curiosity gnawed at me. I stood up slowly, feeling a slight chill crawl up my arms despite the hot night air. I walked out of the booth and down the balcony stairs, my footsteps echoing loudly. The sound of my shoes on the wooden steps was sharp in the silence. At the bottom, I reached for the light switches on the wall and flipped them all on. Instantly, the sanctuary was bathed in warm, bright light. The shadows disappeared into corners. The wooden pews gleamed with their polished surfaces. I stepped into the sanctuary, the carpet muffling my footsteps. I walked down the main aisle, glancing at the tops of the pews to see if anyone had left mugs there. Nothing. I checked each row on the left side, where I had heard the sound. Nothing. The mugs that were there were scattered far apart, one under a pew here, another several feet away under a different pew. None close enough to bump together. I got down on my hands and knees at the front of the sanctuary. The carpet smelled faintly of old vacuum cleaners and dust. From this angle, I could see under all the pews in the front rows. A few mugs sat alone in the shadows under seats, handles sticking out, but they were too far apart to ever touch each other. I stood up slowly, brushing my knees off. My chest felt tight, but I tried to reason with myself. Maybe the building made a strange sound. Maybe a mouse knocked something over. I didn't want to waste time thinking about it. I walked back into the foyer, leaving the sanctuary lights on, and climbed the stairs to the balcony again. The duplicator machine hummed quietly as it finished burning a disc. I slipped in another blank CD and kept working, trying to ignore the tight feeling in my stomach. I focused on labeling the discs, lining up the letters on each label carefully. Minutes passed. My shoulders relaxed, and the silence of the room returned. I almost forgot about the sound. Then it came again. Clink, clink. My body froze. Every muscle tensed as I sat there staring down into the dimly lit sanctuary. The sound was in the exact same place as before. A pause, then it came again. Clink. Goosebumps spread across my arms, and my mouth felt dry. I listened harder. There was no rustling, no footsteps, no movement. Just the quiet clink of ceramic echoing through the empty room. My heart hammered in my chest. I felt like something was staring back up at me from the shadows, though I couldn't see anything. I forced myself to stand up, legs shaking slightly as I walked out of the booth. I rushed down the stairs into the foyer again, breathing heavily, and flipped all the sanctuary lights on once more. The bright lights made the room look normal again. Just wooden pews, hymn books, scattered mugs under some seats, nothing unusual. I walked down the left side again, scanning every inch. The mugs sat silently, alone and unmoving. I knelt down to check under each row. Nothing had changed. No mugs were together. Nothing explained what I heard. I stood there, breathing hard, feeling my pulse in my ears. Frustration mixed with fear. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, that something had fallen or shifted or been bumped by an animal. But there was nothing. No sign of movement. No spilled mugs. No half-empty cups left teetering on an edge. Just silence and the hum of the overhead lights. I walked out of the sanctuary, leaving one of the lights on this time. The soft yellow glow felt comforting as I headed back up the balcony stairs. Inside the booth, I locked the door behind me, something I'd never done before. I sat back down at the duplicator, my hands trembling slightly as I loaded in more blank CDs. For half an hour, nothing happened. The room fell back into its peaceful silence, broken only by the quiet whirring of the duplicator and the occasional creak of the balcony wood as I shifted my feet. Slowly, I started to relax. I kept glancing down at the sanctuary below, but it remained empty and silent. Then, without warning, it happened again. Clink, clink. The sound shot through me like ice water. I stood up so fast my chair scraped across the floor behind me. My chest felt tight, and I swallowed hard, staring down into the dim sanctuary. The light below cast long shadows along the pews, but there was no movement. No person. No animal. Just that echoing clink of ceramic mugs bumping together. Clink, clink, clink. It I still think about that day sometimes. Not in the way you think about something funny that happened, or something you survived and can laugh about later. I mean, I do laugh about it with the people who were there, because what else can you do? But in quiet moments, when it's just me and my own thoughts, it comes back different. My chest gets tight, and I remember how small I felt in those hours, how easily the world could have erased me. We had started the safari early, before sunrise. I remember the chill in the air, the way it bit at my arms each time we stopped moving. We were all half asleep at the beginning, shifting in our seats, hugging mugs of sweet tea, hoping to wake up before the sun rose enough to make everything hot and bright. The truck smelled like canvas and dust, and I remember the heavy sound of the wheels crunching over gravel as we left camp and moved into the quiet roads between trees. There were birds calling out before dawn, their songs rising over each other, layered and echoing through the darkness. It was peaceful at first. That's the part one try to focus on when I think back. The smell of wet earth, the dim shapes of acacia trees against the first light. The guide, a tall, quiet man with tired eyes, drove without saying much. We respected that silence. We knew his eyes were sharper than ours. We were just tourists with cameras and rented binoculars. He was the one with actual life on the line each day. The sun had just come up when we saw the first herd of elephants. They were far off, almost hidden by the taller grasses. Only the movement of ears and trunks gave them away. We watched them for a while. It felt like forever, but probably it was only 15 minutes. They ate without hurry, tearing at branches and pushing smaller bushes aside with those huge, strong trunks. I remember thinking how calm they looked, how slow and ancient their movements felt. Like nothing in the world could scare them. We drove on. Hours passed like they do on safari, with long, quiet stretches and moments of excitement when you see an impala dart across the road or a giraffe chewing peacefully just beside your truck. We stopped for breakfast in a clearing. There was shade from a small tree, and the driver parked so half the truck was under its branches. The smell of sun-warmed leaves drifted down on us. I still remember feeling happy then, swinging my legs out, thinking about getting my backpack down to grab some snacks. My knees cracked as I stood. That tiny memory stands out because it was the last normal feeling I had for a while. I was half standing when our guide let out a noise. It wasn't a word, just a sharp sound from his throat, like he couldn't get the right word out in time. I turned to look at him. His eyes were wide, and his hand was up in the air telling us to stop. I froze, one foot on the metal step, the other still inside the truck. That's when I felt the ground shiver. Not shake, just a deep rolling vibration that you feel in your bones before you hear anything. The elephant burst into view from the far side of the clearing. She came out from behind a stand of bushes, ears spread, trunk up, trumpeting so loud it rattled my teeth. Her skin was covered in reddish dust. She wasn't just walking towards us. She was charging. Her legs moved fast, each step a violent shove forward. Dust sprayed out behind her like a rooster tail. Her eyes were small and dark, focused completely on us. I fell back into the seat. My leg folded under me awkwardly, but I didn't feel any pain then. All I felt was my heart slamming against my ribs. Our guide was already in the driver's seat, turning the key, one hand gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were pale. The engine made a coughing noise. It didn't catch. He turned the key again. The elephant was getting closer. I could see the wrinkles around her eyes, the flared pink insides of her ears. I smelled her before she reached us. A sour, grassy smell mixed with hot dust. He turned the key a third time. The engine whined. Nothing. The elephant was maybe 15 feet away when I felt the truck rock from side to side. She stopped for a second, shaking her head, ears flapping, trunk raised. That trumpet again, so loud I felt my eardrums vibrate. I shut my eyes. I thought that was it. There was nothing between us. The truck wasn't metal enough or strong enough. It was just a shell. The fourth time, the engine roared to life. The guide slammed the gear stick into place. The tires spun in the dirt before catching. The truck lunged forward, bouncing over a rut so hard my teeth clacked together. I opened my eyes just in time to see the elephant veer off to the side, dust flying around her as she skidded slightly on the dry ground. She didn't chase us. She turned away, flapping her ears and swinging her trunk side to side. We didn't slow down for a long time. When we finally did, We stopped under a wide tree with gnarled roots exposed like thick ropes. Everyone sat quietly, breathing hard. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then someone gave a short laugh. Another person joined in. Before long, we were all laughing. It sounded wild and shaky, like when you're so tired you can't stop giggling. What else could we do? We had almost died. It was either laugh or cry. We spent the rest of the day replaying it, making jokes about how the elephant just wanted us to pay park fees, about how we almost became a documentary episode titled, When Animals Attack. Even our guide smiled a little, though it didn't reach his eyes. He seemed distant the whole afternoon, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than before. We were all exhausted by sunset. The sky was purple and gold, the clouds lit up like burning coals on the horizon. I remember thinking about dinner back at camp, wondering what they'd cooked. My legs ached from sitting so long. My shoulders were tight from clenching up all day. We were almost back at camp when we saw him. The bull elephant was standing in the middle of the track, broadside to us, head hanging low. His tusks were long and chipped at the ends. His ears drooped slightly. He looked sloppy, for lack of a better word. His trunk swung back and forth slowly, like he couldn't keep it steady. At first I thought he was sick. Then our guide whispered, more to himself than us, something about the fruit trees. I had heard about those trees before. They dropped sweet fruits that fermented on the ground. Elephants knew to leave them there for a while before eating them. They'd come back later, when the fruits were soft and sour-sweet, and gorge themselves until they were stumbling around like drunk men. It sounded funny when people talked about it around a campfire. It didn't feel funny then. We stopped a good distance away. The truck idled quietly, rumbling beneath us. The elephant didn't seem to notice at first. Then his ears twitched. He lifted his head and looked right at us. His eyes were small, bloodshot, unfocused. I remember thinking it looked like he was staring through us rather than at us. He swung his trunk up and out, sniffing the air. Then he took a step towards us. Another. His pace quickened, and his ears flared out. He lowered his head and let out a rumble, so deep I felt it in my stomach. My mouth went dry. I watched the guide's hand hover over the gear stick, but he didn't move it. The truck was pointed straight at the elephant. If we gunned it forward, we'd crash into him. If we reversed, we'd be slow. The track behind us was narrow and rutted. Reversing at high speed wasn't an option. The elephant stopped about 20 feet away, shaking his head, trunk curling and uncurling. He let out a sharp trumpeting sound and took another few steps forward, ears spread wide. Then he stopped again. My chest burned from holding my breath. He was false charging, testing us, seeing if we'd run. I knew from documentaries and quick safety briefings that if you ran from a false charge, it could turn into a real one. They weren't bluffing for long. They were trying to see what you'd do. So we sat there, not moving, trying to look small and uninteresting. I remember thinking about how from above we must have looked like some weird green metal rock with blinking lights, with all of us frozen inside, barely breathing. The guide whispered to us not to move, not to make a sound. I stared at the elephant's eyes. They were dark and glassy in the dying light. He charged again, trunk swinging, ears flapping. Stopped short. Dust rose around his feet. My thighs burned from tensing so hard. The guide's hands shook slightly on the wheel. I could see a scar on his side peeking out from under his shirt. Later I would learn he had been charged before, that he'd been gored by an elephant and spent 2 years recovering before coming back to this job. That day was his first day back on duty. The elephant circled us, weaving side to side. Each time he moved behind us, my skin crawled. I imagined him coming up from behind and smashing down on the truck roof. We sat like that for hours. At least it felt like hours. The sun went down. The air cooled quickly. Mosquitoes buzzed around my neck and ears, but I didn't dare slap them away. My hands were clenched so tightly they felt numb. Every time the elephant moved away a few steps, hope rose in my chest. Then he'd turn around, shake his head, and come back. Sometimes he'd kick at the dirt, scoop up dust with his trunk, and spray it over his back, staring at us all the while. Other times he'd fake a charge, stopping just before he reached us, flaring his ears out so wide he looked twice his size. At one point I thought I was going to pass out. My head felt light, and I had to force myself to breathe slow and deep to keep from fainting. The smell of him was strong in the cooling air, a mix of dust, sweat, and something rotten from the fermented fruit he'd eaten. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, he seemed to lose interest. He swung his trunk around, sniffed at a bush by the side of the track, and wandered off into the trees. We waited a long time before moving. No one spoke. The guide turned the key, put the truck in gear, and we rolled forward slowly, checking each side of the road until the camp lights finally. I was about 9 or 10 years old when it happened. It was a late night in the middle of summer. The air felt heavy with heat, the type of heat that makes your skin stick to the sheets no matter how many times you flip your pillow to the cool side. My room was small, just big enough to fit my single bed, an old wooden wardrobe, and a small table with my school books piled up on it. My bed was right under the window. I would always leave the curtains open during summer nights, so I could feel even a little bit of breeze coming in. I used to gaze up at the sky from my bed almost every night, counting the few stars that managed to shine through the light pollution from the streets below. That night, I remember feeling restless. I couldn't fall asleep no matter how hard I tried. I lay there on my back, staring at the black sky outside. There weren't many clouds, just an open dark sky stretching endlessly above the roofs of the houses around us. My window screen was slightly torn in the corner, and I could hear the faint chirping of crickets outside. Sometimes, a dog would bark from down the street, or a car would drive past with its headlights cutting through the darkness for a few seconds. I don't remember what time it was. It was late enough that the streets were silent and the neighbors' windows were all dark. I was just lying there, listening to my own breathing, feeling the quietness sink into me. Then I saw it. At first, I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. It was a white orb, rather large, that shot straight into my line of vision. It moved fast, almost like someone had flicked a marble across a floor. My chest tightened. I sat up slowly, holding the window ledge with my fingers, trying to lean closer to see better. This orb of light moved in a few tight circles, like it was tracing an invisible pattern in the sky. Then it shot away so fast I lost sight of it in an instant. My heart was beating fast, and I felt a chill run down my back despite the hot air around me. I kept staring out, my eyes wide and my mind racing. I didn't know what I had just seen. I tried to convince myself that it was maybe just a plane reflecting light weirdly, or a satellite, but deep down I knew it wasn't either of those things. I'd seen planes and satellites before. They never moved like that. Then it came back. It shot into my line of vision again, this time closer and larger. It made no sound. I couldn't hear any humming or buzzing or engine noises, nothing. Just the silence of the summer night and that glowing white orb moving in tight, perfect circles. It felt like it was showing off, or like it was trying to get my attention. My stomach turned as it moved smoothly, then suddenly shot upwards so fast I almost lost my breath just watching it. I remember feeling a strange fear, the kind that makes your mouth dry and your fingers cold. I didn't want to watch anymore. I crawled out of bed and walked out of my room, my knees feeling weak. The hallway outside my room was dark, except for the little night light plugged into the socket near the stairs. I walked around the corner, feeling like I was moving underwater. I was about to walk into my mom's room. Her door was closed, and I reached out to turn the knob, but it was locked. I felt a sudden wave of loneliness and fear wash over me, standing there in the dim hallway with my hand on her door. Her room was right at the top of the stairs, and from where I was standing, I could see down to the bottom. The darkness seemed thick and deep down there, like something was hiding inside it. Then I heard it. Someone was coming up the stairs. At first, it was just a faint noise, like the soft scuffing of feet against the carpeted steps. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then I heard it again, clearer this time, and with it came a snorting sound. A heavy, wet snorting sound, like a pig rooting through mud. My throat went dry, and I leaned slightly over the banister, peering down. I saw it. There was something coming up the stairs, something tall and slender. My mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing. For a split second, I thought it was my dad coming home late, and I remember my lips moving, trying to say his name. But then I saw its face, and every part of my body froze. It was not my dad. It wasn't even human. It was tall, much taller than any person I had ever seen, its shoulders almost brushing the railing as it climbed. Its head was elongated, with 2 long slits for a nose, and its eyes were large and black, like 2 shiny stones pressed into its pale face. It had no ears that I could see, just a smooth surface on both sides of its head. That snorting sound kept coming from it as it climbed. Heavy, wet, thick snorts that made my stomach churn. My legs felt numb, and my fingers slipped off the doorknob. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only stand there as it reached the top of the stairs and turned its head to look straight at me. Its eyes didn't blink. They didn't move. They just stared into mine with a deep darkness that felt like it was sucking out all the air around me. It walked right up to me, its thin body bending slightly so its face could come closer to mine. The snorting sound grew louder. I could feel its breath on my skin, warm and moist, and my knees started shaking so hard I thought they would give out. It bent down further, its face now inches away from mine, and I could see its skin up close, pale and slightly shiny like wet clay. It had no lips, just a thin line for a mouth, and its nostrils flared as it continued to snort into my face. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't listen to me. My chest was tight, and my breathing came out in short, shallow gasps. The creature didn't touch me, but it didn't have to. Just its presence felt heavy and crushing, like it was pressing down on every bone in my body. I felt my knees buckle, and I collapsed onto the carpet. My head felt light, and my vision started going dark around the edges. I could still hear it snorting, even as my eyes rolled back, and everything went black. The next thing I remember was feeling someone shaking me gently. I opened my eyes slowly, my head pounding with a dull ache. I was lying at the bottom of the stairs. The bright light from the kitchen ceiling hurt my eyes. My mom was kneeling next to me, her face pale and worried. She was asking me how I got there. Her voice sounded far away, like she was speaking to me through water. I tried to sit up, but my arms felt weak. She told me I must have sleepwalked down the stairs in the middle of the night. She kept asking if I was okay, checking my arms and legs for any injuries. I didn't say anything. I just sat there on the cold floor, feeling the rough carpet against my palms, staring up at the stairs. Everything felt wrong. The house felt wrong. I could still hear that snorting sound echoing in my head, and I could still see its face every time I blinked. My mom helped me stand up and took me back to my room. She tucked me into bed and sat there with me until I fell asleep again, my body shaking with silent sobs that I couldn't control. The next morning, the sun was shining bright through my window. Birds were chirping outside, and cars were already driving past on their way to work. My room looked so normal in the daylight. My school books were still piled up on the table, my backpack still leaning against my wardrobe. But I didn't feel normal. My chest still felt heavy, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw that tall, slender creature bending down into my face, its large black eyes staring into mine, and that horrible snorting sound filling my ears. For days after that, I couldn't sleep properly. I would lie in bed with the curtains closed tight, my blanket pulled up to my chin, my eyes wide open staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house, every sound from outside made my heart jump into my throat. I stopped looking out of my window at night. I didn't want to see the sky anymore. I didn't want to see anything anymore. My mom thought I was just tired, or that I had a bad dream, but it wasn't a dream. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Years later, I tried to convince myself that maybe it really was a dream, that maybe my mind made it up because I was half asleep and scared after seeing that orb in the sky. I tried to tell myself that it was just sleep paralysis, that my brain woke up before my body and created a hallucination to fill in the blank space. But deep down, I know it wasn't that. It felt too real. The smell of its breath, the sound of its snorting, the way its eyes stared into mine with that blank, heavy darkness, it was all too real. Even now, as an adult, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, feeling like I can't move. My mind goes back to that night every time. I remember standing at the top of the stairs, looking down into the darkness, and seeing it come up towards me. I remember the way its body moved, smooth and silent, its shoulders almost brushing the railing. I remember the snorting, that awful pig-like snorting that made my skin crawl. I never saw it again after that night. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my house late at night, I catch myself listening for that sound, just in case. Because if I ever saw it again, if I ever had to look into those eyes one more time, I think my heart would just stop. I think every part of me would shut down from fear. And I don't think anyone would ever be able to wake me up again. I don't tell people about that night anymore. When I was younger, I tried to tell a few friends, but they just laughed and said I had a wild imagination. So I keep it to myself now. But I remember it clearly, every small detail. The heavy summer air, the torn window screen, the way the orb moved in perfect circles, the feeling of my knees giving out as that creature bent down over me. Sometimes, when I'm walking alone in the dark, I feel like I can almost hear it behind me, snorting softly, its breath warm and wet on the back of my neck. I turn around quickly, but there's never anything there. Just the empty street or the silent hallway. But I know it's out there somewhere. Watching, waiting, and every time I think about it, I tell myself the same thing. If I ever see it again, if I ever hear that snorting. When I was 16, my friends and I basically had our own apartment in this building that one of their parents owned. It was in Chicago, and the building was old, like really old. The bricks were chipped in places, the pipes were loud, and the walls felt like they carried memories that went back almost 100 years. It always smelled like a mix of dust, old wood, metal, and wet cement in the stairwells. Some nights you'd get a strong whiff of old cigarette smoke, even if no one was smoking inside. The building was 5 stories tall, narrow, tucked between similar old brick buildings, and the hallways had those faded brown carpets that felt sticky in the summer. My friend's dad, the owner, used to tell us about how it was built back when Al Capone ran Chicago, and apparently there were tunnels under it that his dad said were used by Capone's men back in the day. He told us once that after he bought the place, he found a small blocked archway down in the basement. He sealed it off completely with concrete because he didn't want kids going down there messing around and getting hurt. Even though it was sealed, we always felt weird in that basement. The light flickered near the boiler, and the room had this thick, damp smell that you could taste in your mouth when you breathed in. It was just uncomfortable to be down there alone. We used the roof as our smoking spot. The only way to get up there was to go through the attic. To get to the attic, you had to unlock this thin, creaky wooden door in the back stairwell, then climb up a steep set of wooden steps that were dusty and unfinished, with uneven boards. It always smelled like mice, insulation, and warm wood up there, like an old shed. There were no lights at all in the attic. It was pitch dark unless you had your phone out. We had those shitty flip or brick phones back, then that barely put out any light, just a dim pale blue glow that lit up maybe a foot in front of you. It made everything look even creepier, because the light didn't spread far enough to see the edges of the attic. One day, my friend Manny and I decided to go up to smoke like we normally did. It was around late afternoon, close to evening, because I remember the sunset light coming in sideways through the apartment windows, giving everything that dull orange tint. The living room window was open, and the breeze was moving the thin curtains a little. I had just gotten back from school, still wearing my black hoodie and dark jeans, shoes scuffed up from walking all day. My backpack was thrown on the old tan couch with broken springs. I told Manny to wait up because I needed to take a piss. I went to the small bathroom, the one with peeling blue paint on the walls and a stained sink, and after I finished, I washed my hands quickly, wiping them on my jeans because there wasn't a clean towel in there. I came out and Manny wasn't in the living room anymore, so I figured he went ahead upstairs. I grabbed my pack of Marlboros and my old black Motorola flip phone. The battery was always half dead, and the screen had scratches all over it. I used the screen light as my flashlight. I walked out the apartment door into the dim hallway. The hallway had that strong smell of stale carpet and something burnt, probably from someone's cooking. I turned left to the back stairwell, stepping over an empty beer can someone left there. The stairwell light was out again. That was normal. The bulb would burn out and take days to get replaced. I opened the narrow wooden attic door, its paint chipped and peeling near the handle. It scraped loudly as it opened, echoing slightly in the hollow stairwell. I started climbing up the steep steps. Each step made this loud creaking noise that felt like it echoed right through my chest. My phone light barely lit up the wooden planks in front of me. I reached the top and pushed the attic door open. The smell hit me first, a strong mix of warm dust, old insulation, maybe even rat droppings somewhere. It was thick and dry and made my throat itch. I stepped in slowly, my phone held out in front of me, the dim blue glow moving along the wooden beams above me, and the fiberglass insulation peeking through some gaps. It felt like there was someone up there. It wasn't just a feeling in my mind. It was like I could sense another body in the room with me. The air felt heavier, like something was taking up space just ahead of me. My first thought was Manny was hiding to mess with me. We did that a lot. One time I hid behind an old folded metal chair up there and grabbed his ankle as he walked past. He jumped so hard he fell onto his back and almost kicked a hole in the attic wall. So this time I just assumed it was him getting revenge. I raised my phone light and scanned around slowly. The light shook a little because my hand was trembling. It wasn't fear yet, just the chill of the attic and how silent it was up there, plus holding your arm out like that makes your hand shake. I saw the dusty wooden floorboards, old stacked boxes from when the apartments were storage rooms decades ago, insulation that had fallen down in clumps. I moved the light left, and that's when I saw a shadow move across the far side of the attic, near the corner where the plywood sheets were stacked up. I said in my head, "Manny, I know it's you, quit messing around." I didn't even say it out loud because I felt like he was going to jump out at me anyway, and I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of scaring me first. I kept following the shadow. I moved forward carefully, stepping over an old mop handle and a broken piece of pipe. The floor creaked loud with each step, sending echoes through the attic beams. The shadow moved again, sliding past a stack of boxes. I kept thinking it was Manny crouching and crawling around to freak me out. I stepped over to the boxes and shined my phone light around the edges. I didn't see anything, but the shadow moved again, slipping into the corner. I raised my voice a little and said in a frustrated whisper, "Stop playing, I know it's you." I felt my heart beat harder because something didn't feel right about how silent it was. Usually Manny would start laughing or say something to scare me, but it was just silent. The only thing I could hear was the faint traffic noise from the street 5 floors down, muffled through the brick walls and attic beams. I kept following the shadow. I stepped closer to the corner. My phone screen dimmed for a second because of the battery warning, then lit back up. I moved the light around the corner, expecting him to jump out. But there was nothing there. Just the plywood leaning against the wall and an old rusted paint can. My chest felt tight. I turned slowly to look behind me, and that's when I heard from downstairs, faint but clear, Manny saying, "What?" like he was responding to me calling him. It echoed up through the attic floorboards from the living room below. My entire body went cold. I felt my knees lock up and my breathing go shallow. My head felt light, like I wasn't fully in my own body for a second. I stood frozen, staring into the dark corner where the shadow had disappeared. My phone battery warning popped up again, dimming the screen and making everything even darker. My ears were ringing slightly from how fast my heart was beating. I turned around slowly, feeling like if I turned too fast something would jump at me. I walked back the way I came, each step creaking so loud it felt like it would wake the entire building. I got to the attic door and pulled it open fast, slamming it behind me and rushing down the narrow stairs, almost tripping. I felt my shoes slipping on the dusty wood as I hit the bottom. I opened the stairwell door back into the hallway and ran straight into the apartment. Manny was sitting on the couch, one leg crossed over the other, talking to his girlfriend on his old silver Nokia phone, not even looking up at me. The TV was on, playing some old sitcom with the volume low. I stood there panting, staring at him. My lungs burned from holding my breath for so long up there. I didn't say anything at first. I just walked to the kitchen sink and took a deep breath, letting the cold tap water run over my hands to ground myself. The kitchen smelled like instant noodles and old garbage because we hadn't taken it out yet. I turned around and looked back at Manny sitting there still talking. It hit me all at once that he couldn't have been up there. He was down here the entire time. Later that night, I laid down on the old mattress on the floor, the springs poking my back, staring up at the cracked ceiling paint. The room smelled like smoke, old carpet, and sweat. I kept thinking about what I saw. People always try to tell me maybe it was my own shadow, but that's impossible. The way it moved, the way it slid between the boxes, it wasn't mine. I had my Motorola flip phone held out in front of me. The light only lit up a foot or two. My shadow would have been directly behind me or right below me. This shadow moved sideways, fast, sliding into the corner. I saw it as clearly as I saw the boxes and plywood. I never went back into that attic alone after that. Even when Manny or our other friends asked me to go up for a smoke, I always found an excuse to stay back. I'd say I was tired or my phone was dead, or I'd go down to the street instead. Every time I walked past that attic door, I felt my chest tighten, like there was someone behind it waiting for me to open it again. That building got torn down years later, when I was already moved out and working warehouse jobs. They put up some sleek glass apartment complex there now with bright lights and clean hallways. But every time I drive past that block, even now as an adult, I feel the same chill in my chest that I felt that day. I know what I saw. People can tell me all day that shadows are tricks of light or reflections or your own movements, but I know that attic wasn't empty. Something was up there with me. Something that moved without making a sound. something that watched me follow it into the corner and then just disappeared. I never told my parents or teachers or anyone else because I knew they'd brush it off. I only ever told a couple friends, and even then they just said it was probably a stray cat or a rat casting a big shadow. But there were no cats up there. No rats big enough to make a shadow like that. It was human-shaped. It moved like a person. Every detail of it is burned into my memory forever. The attic smell, the dry insulation air, the sound of my steps creaking, and that dim flickering Motorola flip phone light. I woke up before sunrise that morning, not because of an alarm or because I had anything planned, but because I just couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet, too still. I rolled over on my side and stared at the wall for a while, listening to the faint ticking of the old clock in my living room. After a while, I sat up and rubbed my face with my hands. My mouth felt dry and tasted stale, so I stood up, stretched my back until I felt a crack run down my spine, and walked barefoot across the cold wooden floor to the kitchen. The floorboards creaked softly with each step. The kitchen felt colder than my room. I opened the cabinet and took out a glass, filled it with water from the filter jug, and drank it all in slow gulps. It was still dark outside the window above the sink. I could just barely see the outline of the trees in the backyard swaying in the early breeze. There were no lights on in any of the neighboring houses yet. I set the glass down on the counter, stood there for a while, then walked back to my room and pulled on a hoodie, sweatpants, and my old running shoes. They were sitting by the door, dusty from lack of use. I tied the laces slowly and checked that my phone had enough battery, though I didn't plan to use it. I stepped outside into the dawn chill. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. I locked my door and put the keys in my hoodie pocket. Then I walked down my front steps, across the dewy grass, and onto the dirt road that led away from my little house and into the woods. I had bought this place a year ago, wanting some peace away from the city noise. It was cheap because it was far from town, deep in an area people called the Back Hills. There was nothing out here except old, empty farmhouses, hunting cabins, and trees that went on for miles. I walked down the dirt road with my hands in my pockets. The sun was just barely starting to rise behind the trees. The sky had that pale blue color that only lasts a few minutes before the sun fully comes up. Birds started chirping in the distance. My breath came out in little white puffs. After walking for about 15 minutes, I reached the edge of the woods. There was a small, narrow trail that cut through the trees. It used to be a logging trail decades ago, but now it was just a narrow path with grass and bushes growing through the packed dirt. I walked into the trail. The branches brushed against my shoulders, and the tops of my shoes knocked dew off the weeds that grew at the edges. My shoes were soaked within minutes. I kept walking. The trees were tall and close together. Pine and spruce mostly, mixed with some old twisted oaks. There were no sounds except my footsteps, the birds, and the faint rustling of leaves high above me. I walked for a long time, maybe an hour. I didn't check my phone. I just kept moving forward. The trail curved gently downwards after a while, following the slope of the hill. As I walked further, I noticed something strange. I saw a small pile of rocks on the side of the trail. They were stacked on top of each other in a rough little tower, maybe 4 or 5 rocks high. I slowed down when I saw it. It looked deliberate, like someone had been here before me and left a mark. I stepped closer and crouched down, staring at it. The rocks were covered in pale green moss on the underside, but the tops were clean, like they had just been placed there recently. I stood up and looked around. The forest felt even more silent here. The bird sounds were gone. I felt a tightness in my chest for no reason I could explain. I shook it off and kept walking. As I walked deeper into the woods, I started seeing more of those little piles. Some were right on the edge of the trail, some tucked under tree roots, some balanced on rotting logs. All the rocks looked the same, round, gray, palm-sized, probably picked from the stream that ran somewhere nearby. I kept my eyes forward and walked faster. The trail became steeper and narrower, and the tree trunks got thicker. The ground was covered in dead pine needles that muffled my footsteps. After a while, I started smelling something. It was faint at first, just a sour, metallic tang carried on the cold morning air. I slowed down and sniffed again. It was stronger now. It smelled like rust and old blood. I stopped walking and stood very still. The smell seemed to be coming from ahead of me. I took a few more steps forward. The smell grew stronger. My stomach tightened. I looked around but saw nothing unusual at first. Just trees and undergrowth, shadows shifting in the breeze. I kept walking, trying to breathe shallowly through my mouth to avoid the smell. Then I saw it. Off the side of the trail, about 10 feet away, was a small clearing with grass flattened down. There was something lying on the ground there. I stepped off the trail onto the wet, mossy forest floor, my shoes sinking slightly in the soft earth. I walked closer until I could see what it was. It was a deer, a young doe, lying on its side with its legs stiff and stretched out. Its eyes were open, clouded over, staring at nothing. Its stomach was torn open, rib bones sticking out through dried brown blood. Flies buzzed around it. Its tongue hung out of its mouth, swollen and purple. The smell hit me in full force now. I gagged and covered my mouth with my hoodie sleeve. I stood there staring at it for a while. The wound didn't look like it came from a hunter. There were no clean cuts. It looked ripped and shredded, like something had clawed it open. I glanced around at the trees, my heart beating harder in my chest. The woods were silent again, no birds, no breeze, nothing. I turned around and walked quickly back to the trail, wiping my sleeve across my nose to get rid of the smell. I kept walking down the trail, faster now. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but I felt a tight knot of fear in my chest. As I walked further, the trail dipped into a small hollow between two hills. The trees grew denser here, almost blocking out the sky. The ground was covered in damp brown leaves. My shoes crunched softly with each step. Then I heard something ahead of me. It was a faint sound like branches snapping. I stopped walking and listened. At first, I thought it was just a squirrel or a deer. But then I heard it again, louder. A crack, then another crack. Then silence. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. I took a few slow steps forward, trying not to make any noise. The trail curved to the left up ahead. I reached the curve and peeked around it. Standing about 30 feet ahead of me was a man. At least, I thought it was a man. He was tall and thin, wearing old brown pants and a jacket that looked torn and dirty. His hair was long and matted. He was standing with his back to me, facing away, looking down at something on the ground. His shoulders were hunched. I couldn't see what he was looking at. I felt frozen, my feet rooted to the ground. The man didn't move. He just stood there, completely still. The silence of the woods pressed down on me. My chest felt tight, and I realized I was holding my breath. I let it out slowly, trying not to make a sound. I looked down at my feet, and then back at the man. I thought about turning around and walking back the way I came, but I was scared to move. Then the man twitched. Just a little jerk of his head, like he was sniffing the air. He turned slightly, not enough for me to see his face, but enough to know he was aware of me. I felt a rush of cold fear wash over me, starting in my chest and spreading to my arms and legs. I took one slow step backwards, then another. My shoe snapped a twig. The sound echoed in the silent woods. The man's head turned fully now. I saw part of his face through his hair. His skin looked pale and dirty. His eyes were dark, too dark, like deep bruises in his face. His mouth opened slightly. I couldn't tell if he was saying anything. He took a step towards me. I turned and ran. My feet pounded the trail, slipping on the wet leaves and roots. I grabbed tree trunks to keep from falling. I ran as fast as I could, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear him behind me, heavy footsteps crashing through the undergrowth, branches snapping. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. The trail twisted and turned. At one point I slipped and fell, landing hard on my knee. Pain shot up my leg, but I scrambled back up and kept running. My chest burned and my eyes watered from the cold air. I jumped over a fallen log and kept running. Eventually, I saw the end of the trail ahead of me. The trees opened up to the dirt road where I had come in. I burst out of the woods onto the road, stumbling and nearly falling on the gravel. I turned around. The trail behind me was empty. I stood there, doubled over, breathing hard, staring at the dark entrance of the trail. My entire body was shaking. I waited for a minute, 2 minutes, but saw nothing move in the shadows. I turned and walked quickly back down the dirt road towards my house. My knee throbbed with each step, and my lungs burned from running. I kept glancing back over my shoulder every few seconds. I finally reached my house, unlocked the door with trembling hands, and stepped inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Then I went to every window and checked the curtains were closed. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the curtain edges. I stood in the middle of my living room, listening. Everything was silent. The ticking clock on the wall sounded deafening in the quiet house. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself another glass of water. My throat felt raw. I drank the water in small sips, my hands trembling so badly I spilled some on the counter. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at my shaking hands. I could still smell the sour, rusty smell of the dead deer clinging to my hoodie sleeve. I wiped at it with a wet rag, scrubbing hard until the smell faded. My knee throbbed with pain. I rolled up my sweatpants and saw the skin scraped raw and bleeding slightly. I pressed a paper towel against it until it stopped bleeding. My chest still felt tight. I got up and checked every window again. Then I sat back down and tried to breathe slowly. I woke up early that morning with an ache in my back. The ground felt harder than usual, even though I had slept on this old mattress for years. My arms were stiff, probably from carrying those firewood bundles the day before. It was just another quiet Saturday for me. I had no real plans except to finish chopping wood and clear some space in the shed. The sun wasn't fully out yet, only a faint gray light seeping through the curtains. I sat there on the edge of my bed, rubbing my hands together to warm them up, and listened to the silence of the house. The heater clicked and hummed, trying to push warm air into the cold rooms. I got dressed slowly, pulling on thick socks and a flannel shirt, and walked to the kitchen. The floor felt cold under my feet. I turned on the kettle and stared out the window while it heated up. Outside, the trees looked black against the dawn sky. There was frost on the grass. The small creek that ran by the yard was hidden in darkness, but I could hear the water moving if I focused. Steam curled from my mug when I poured the hot water. I sat at the table, drinking my coffee slowly. I always liked those first few sips before the world woke up. By the time I finished, the sky was turning pale orange. I grabbed my gloves from the counter and stepped outside. The cold air hit me hard, biting at my face. I could see my breath clouding out in front of me. I walked to the woodshed behind the house and grabbed the axe leaning against the wall. I always kept it there, blade down, away from the damp. The handle felt cold in my grip as I lifted it and rested it against my shoulder. I started splitting wood, stacking each piece into a neat pile. My arms burned from the work, but it felt good to move my body. After an hour, I took a break and leaned against the shed, looking out at the trees. There was a narrow dirt trail leading from the shed into the woods behind my property. The trees were dense back there, mostly pine and oak, and they stretched far enough that I couldn't see the end. I had only walked deep into those woods a few times. There was nothing out there but trees, brush, and the quiet. Sometimes deer passed through, or a coyote if I was up late enough to hear them yipping in the distance. I went back inside around noon to make lunch. I fried eggs and bread in a pan, letting the butter sizzle until the smell filled the kitchen. I ate standing at the counter, staring at the floor, thinking about what else I had to do that day. I washed the pan and set it aside to dry, then sat down on the couch to rest my back. I turned on the small TV but muted the volume. The flickering images filled the room with light while I closed my eyes for a few minutes. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall above me, each second stretching out in the silence. After resting, I put on my boots and coat and decided to walk into the woods behind the house. I wanted to check on the small stream that ran back there. Sometimes fallen branches clogged the flow and flooded small areas, creating mud pits that lasted for weeks. I stepped off the yard onto the narrow dirt path. The cold air felt sharper deeper in the woods. I could hear the crunch of frost under my boots as I walked. The smell of pine needles and damp earth filled my nose. There was no wind, just heavy stillness around me. I kept walking, looking down at the ground to watch for roots or rocks. The path curved gently to the right and then dropped down a small slope towards the creek. When I reached it, I crouched down and checked the water flow. It was clear, with dead leaves drifting along the surface. Nothing was blocked, so I stood back up and stretched my arms above my head. As I stood there listening to the water, I felt something shift in the air around me. It was small at first, like a tension I couldn't see. My shoulders felt tight, and the hairs on my arms lifted under my coat. I turned around and looked up the slope behind me. The trees stood silent and still, but I felt like I wasn't alone. I scanned the shadows between the trunks, squinting to see better. There was no movement, no sound, but my chest felt tight with unease. I tried to shake it off and started walking back up the slope. My boots slipped a little on the frost-covered leaves, and I had to grab a thin tree trunk to steady myself. As I climbed back onto the path, I paused and listened again. The silence pressed in around me. Even the birds were quiet. Usually there were small sounds of branches creaking, squirrels running, birds calling out, but it felt like everything had stopped to watch me. I walked faster along the path, my eyes darting from side to side. I didn't see anything, but my body was tense, and my steps were loud in the quiet. After a few minutes, I forced myself to slow down. My heart was beating too fast, and I felt foolish for being so jumpy. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves. Maybe a deer had passed through, and I didn't see it. I kept walking until I reached the yard again. I stepped onto the grass and felt a rush of relief. I looked back at the woods, at the dark rows of trees standing silently. Nothing moved, but I still felt uneasy. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up around the shed and putting the chopped wood into neat stacks against the wall. My arms were tired and my fingers ached from gripping the axe handle. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped quickly. I could see my breath again. I went inside and locked the door behind me. I turned on the heater and warmed my hands in front of the vent. My house felt small but safe. I made soup for dinner and sat at the table eating slowly, staring at the dark windows. I couldn't see anything outside, just my own reflection looking back at me. After dinner, I washed the bowl and spoon and wiped down the counters. I turned off the kitchen light and walked to the living room. The TV cast a dull blue light onto the walls. I sat on the couch and pulled a blanket over my legs. I felt tired but restless. My mind kept going back to the woods, to that heavy silence. I tried to push it out of my head and focus on the TV screen, but nothing held my attention. After an hour, I turned it off and sat in the dark, listening to the heater clicking and humming. I decided to go to bed early. I brushed my teeth, changed into sweatpants, and crawled under the covers. The sheets felt cold at first, but warmed quickly with my body heat. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. My mind wouldn't stop replaying that walk in the woods, the feeling that someone was there, watching me. I turned onto my side and pulled the blankets tighter around my shoulders. I could hear the house settling around me, wood creaking softly. I closed my eyes and tried to slow my breathing. Eventually I drifted off into a light, uneasy sleep. I woke up suddenly a few hours later. I didn't know what time it was, but the room was completely dark. My heart was pounding in my chest. I lay still, trying to figure out what woke me up. The heater was off, and I couldn't hear anything except the blood rushing in my ears. My mouth felt dry, and my hands were cold against the sheets. I listened harder, straining to hear beyond the walls of my room. Then I heard it, a faint crunching sound, like footsteps on frost-covered grass. It was coming from outside, near the back of the house. I lay there frozen, my eyes wide open, staring into the dark. The sound stopped, then started again, moving slowly along the side of the house. I could hear each step pressing down on the grass and leaves. My chest felt tight, and I was barely breathing. The footsteps reached the corner of the house and paused. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The sound started again, moving past my bedroom window. I lay perfectly still, afraid to even blink. I couldn't see anything through the curtains, but I knew someone was out there. The footsteps moved towards the back door and stopped again. I listened, waiting for the doorknob to rattle or the lock to click, but there was only silence. Minutes passed, each one feeling longer than the last. Finally, I heard the footsteps again, moving away from the house towards the woods. They faded slowly until there was only silence. I lay there for what felt like hours, staring into the dark, too afraid to move. My mind was racing with questions. Who was out there? What did they want? Why were they walking around my house in the middle of the night? Eventually, I forced myself to sit up. My hands were shaking as I reached for the lamp on the table beside my bed. The warm yellow light filled the room, and I felt a small sense of relief. I got out of bed and walked slowly to the window. I pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. The yard was dark and empty. I couldn't see anything beyond the edge of the porch light. The woods stood silent and black in the distance. I let the curtain fall back into place and stepped away from the window. My legs felt weak, and I sat down on the edge of the bed to catch my breath. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, sitting with my back against the headboard, staring at the window. I kept thinking about those footsteps, the slow, deliberate way they moved around the house, like whoever it was knew exactly where they were going. I waited for the sky to lighten, for the first pale glow of dawn to fill the room. When it finally came, I stood up on shaky legs and walked to the window again. The yard was empty. The grass was covered in frost, glittering under the early light. I couldn't see any footprints from where I stood, but I knew they were there. I put on my boots and coat and stepped outside. The air felt sharp and cold against my face. I walked slowly around the house, scanning the ground. I saw them immediately. Footprints in the frost, circling the house, stopping at each window, each door. They were clear and fresh, leading away from the back door towards the woods. I followed them a few steps, but my chest tightened, and I stopped. I didn't want to go any further. I turned around and walked quickly back to the house. I locked the door behind me and stood there in the kitchen, staring at the floor, trying to calm my breathing. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't know what to say. I woke up early that morning feeling tired. My alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. I didn't even need it. I barely slept that night. I had been thinking about the hike I planned with myself for the weekend. I didn't really want to go alone, but all my friends either had work or didn't want to do it. I told myself I wouldn't cancel it just because no one wanted to come with me. I always ended up changing my plans for other people. This time, I told myself I would do it no matter what. I packed my backpack the night before. I had 2 bottles of water, a peanut butter sandwich, a small bag of almonds, a lighter, a torch, a Swiss knife, my phone, and a portable charger. I wore my old hiking boots that were scratched up from the sides, but still worked fine. I threw my light jacket on and left my small apartment before the sun came up. It was cold outside. I could see my breath fogging up in front of my face as I walked to my old Toyota parked by the road. The city was quiet at that time. The air smelled different, like metal, cold and sharp. I drove for about an hour and a half to get to the trailhead. On the way there, the sun started coming up behind the hills. The sky turned from dark blue to gray and then to a dull orange. I watched it through the dirty windshield while sipping on the coffee I bought from a gas station. It tasted burnt and bitter, but I needed it. I kept thinking about how quiet the world felt at that time. There were no cars on the road, no shops open, just empty stretches of highway and sleeping houses passing by. I reached the small dirt parking lot by the trail entrance. There were no other cars parked there. Usually, at least a few people came to this trail on weekends. I told myself maybe it was too early and they would come later. I parked close to the trail sign. The wooden board had an old map nailed onto it, but the plastic cover was cracked and part of the paper inside was yellowed and peeling. I looked at it anyway, tracing the red line of the trail with my finger. I knew the route. It was about 12 kilometers to the end and then back the same way. The trail was mostly flat with some rocky parts near the middle where it cut through the hills. I tightened my shoelaces, pulled the backpack onto my shoulders, locked my car, and started walking. The first part of the trail was easy. It went through some low dry grass with scattered oak trees. The sun was rising higher now, and the light started touching the tops of the trees. Birds were calling to each other, but it still felt quiet. The only sounds were my boots crunching the gravel and the wind blowing through the grass. It felt peaceful at first. The smell of dust and wild plants filled my nose. It felt fresh. After about 30 minutes, the trail started sloping upwards. The dirt turned reddish, mixed with small sharp rocks that made my boots slip sometimes. I kept my head down, focusing on where I placed my feet. I didn't want to twist my ankle. As I walked, I noticed how the trees became thicker and taller, growing closer together. The air felt cooler under their shade. I could hear insects buzzing and small lizards running through the dry leaves when I passed. I kept walking at a steady pace, not fast but not too slow either. I wanted to make it to the end point by noon, so I could return before it got too hot. Around 2 hours in, I stopped to drink some water. I sat down on a flat rock by the side of the trail. My shirt was damp with sweat on my back. I pulled off my backpack and drank half a bottle, then ate some almonds. My legs were already feeling tired, but in a good way. I liked that feeling of pushing myself. It made me feel real, like I was actually alive, and not just passing time in my room like most days. When I stood up to continue walking, I noticed the air felt different. It wasn't the temperature. It was just quieter. I couldn't hear any birds anymore. No insects buzzing either. Only the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. I told myself maybe it was normal. Animals moved around, and maybe they went deeper into the trees as the sun rose higher. Still, I felt uneasy. I adjusted my backpack and started walking again. The trail curved sharply to the right and entered a denser part of the woods. The trees here grew so close together that their branches touched above, blocking most of the sunlight. The ground was covered in dead leaves, broken twigs, and dark, damp soil. The air smelled earthy, mixed with old moss. It was cooler there, almost cold despite the day warming up outside. My footsteps sounded loud on the leaves. Every crunch echoed in the stillness. I kept walking, trying not to think about how quiet it was. I focused on my breathing, counting my steps to calm myself. About 15 minutes into that shaded part of the trail, I started hearing a noise behind me. It was faint, like something moving over dry leaves. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. I listened hard, holding my breath, but there was nothing, just the silence pressing against my ears. I turned around and looked down the trail. It twisted out of sight after a few meters, hidden behind thick tree trunks. I stared for a while, waiting to see movement. Nothing. I told myself it was probably a squirrel or a deer, but it felt strange that it stopped the moment I did. I started walking again, a bit faster this time. After a few steps, I heard the noise again, a faint rustle of leaves, and then silence when I paused. I didn't want to scare myself, but I couldn't help it. My heart started beating harder in my chest. I clenched my fists and kept walking, refusing to look back again. The trail started sloping downwards, leading to a narrow valley between two hills. Here, the trees became less dense, but the sunlight didn't reach down much. I could see patches of gray light on the ground, mixed with deep shadows. I kept moving quickly, my boots sliding sometimes on loose dirt. The sound behind me started again. This time, it was louder. It wasn't like an animal moving fast. It was steady, matching my pace. It sounded like footsteps. Crunch, 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 always stopping when I stopped. My stomach felt tight. I wanted to turn around and see, but I was scared that if I turned, I would see something I didn't want to see. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The trail dipped further into the valley. The walls of dirt and rock rose on both sides. The trees thinned out, replaced by bushes and tall dry grass. As I walked through the bottom of the valley, I could hear my own breathing louder than before. My throat felt dry. I didn't want to drink water. I just wanted to get out of that part and into the open again. The footsteps behind me continued, always stopping when I did. I could feel sweat dripping down my temples despite the cold air. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to keep walking. After what felt like forever, the trail started going uphill again, leading out of the valley. The bushes became thicker here, growing over the trail, so I had to push through some of them with my arms. My backpack straps caught on branches a few times, jerking me backwards suddenly, making my heart jump. I pushed through them quickly, ignoring the scratches they left on my arms. The footsteps behind me grew softer as the bushes became denser. For a few moments, I didn't hear anything. I thought maybe whatever was following me stopped. When I finally reached the top of the small hill, the trail opened up to a wide clearing. The grass here was dry and yellow, and the ground was flat and hard. There were a few fallen logs scattered around. The sun shone bright here, making the clearing feel warm. I stopped there, breathing hard. I turned around slowly, scanning the trail behind me. I didn't see anyone. No animals. Nothing. Just the dark path between the trees leading back down into the valley. I stood there for a while, my hands shaking slightly. I felt like I was being watched, but I couldn't see anyone. My chest felt tight. I walked to one of the fallen logs and sat down. I pulled off my backpack and drank some water, forcing myself to take slow sips. I ate the peanut butter sandwich, even though I wasn't hungry. I needed to do something normal, something that made me feel okay again. The sun felt good on my face. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, listening to the wind blowing through the tall grass around me. For a short moment, I felt calm again. When I finished eating, I checked my phone. There was no signal. I knew there wouldn't be any here, but I checked anyway. I put it back in my pocket and stood up to continue walking. The trail continued on the other side of the clearing, leading back into the trees. I didn't want to go back into the woods, but I had to. I couldn't just stay there forever. I picked up my backpack and slung it over my shoulders, then started walking across the clearing towards the tree line. As I stepped into the shade of the trees again, the cool air felt heavy around me. The trail here was narrow, barely wide enough for one person. The bushes on both sides scratched at my arms as I walked. I moved quickly, wanting to get through that part as fast as possible. My ears strained for any sound behind me, but I didn't hear anything except my own footsteps. After about 10 minutes, the trail started curving to the left, leading towards a rocky slope. The ground turned into loose gravel, making it hard to keep my balance. I slowed down, placing my feet carefully. That's when I heard it again. The crunch of footsteps behind me, louder this time. They didn't stop when I stopped. They kept coming, getting closer. My heart jumped into my throat. I spun around quickly, looking back down the trail. For a few seconds, I didn't see anything. Then, between two bushes, I saw movement. A shape. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. He was standing partly hidden by the bushes, wearing dark clothes. His face was turned away, looking down at the ground. My chest felt like it stopped working. I stared at him, frozen. He didn't move for a few seconds. Then slowly, I woke up before sunrise, my phone alarm buzzing quietly on the old wooden nightstand beside me. My body felt heavy, and it took a minute to remember where I was. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. The cabin was cold that morning. I could feel the chill coming off the windows, even though all the curtains were shut tight. I didn't hear any birds yet. Everything felt still, like the world was holding its breath. I had booked this old rental cabin deep in the forest 2 days before. I needed to get away from work and people and noise. I thought staying alone in a place with no Wi-Fi, no reception, and only a wood stove for warmth would reset my mind. I didn't even tell many people where I was going. Just my brother knew, in case something went wrong. That morning, I made myself get up. I boiled water over the little propane stove and poured it into instant coffee sachets I had brought from home. The first sip tasted bitter and burned my tongue, but the heat felt good going down my chest. I sat there on the cabin's porch step, staring out into the dark forest. There was a thin mist hanging low between the trees. The air smelled like wet pine needles and damp earth. I felt calm, like I was finally away from everything that kept pulling at me every day. After finishing my coffee, I got dressed in my thick hiking pants, my dark gray thermal shirt, and a black fleece hoodie. I pulled on my boots and laced them tight. My plan for the day was to hike to a nearby creek I had read about in an old guest log. I packed a small backpack with water, a snack bar, and my small folding knife. I also put in my flashlight, just in case I came back late. The sun was starting to rise as I locked the cabin door and headed down the narrow dirt path leading into the woods. The forest felt completely empty at first. I couldn't hear any cars, no planes overhead, nothing. Just the crunch of gravel and fallen pine needles under my boots. The sun rays started coming through the tall trees in thin golden lines, lighting up little patches of ferns and fallen branches. I felt relaxed, but at the same time, there was that quiet tension in my chest that always comes when I walk alone in a place with no one around. I kept looking over my shoulder every now and then, even though there was no sound behind me except my own footsteps. I walked for almost an hour, following old orange ribbons tied to tree trunks, which marked the way to the creek. Some were faded, almost white from years of rain and sun. A few times I lost the ribbons and wandered in circles until I spotted another one further ahead. Finally, I heard running water. I pushed through a patch of thick ferns, ducked under a branch that hung low, and found myself standing on a small mossy bank. The creek was narrow but fast, tumbling over rocks and fallen branches, clear as glass. I crouched down and dipped my hand in. It was freezing cold, but felt clean. I washed my face in it, letting the cold water drip down my neck and soak into my shirt collar. I sat on a fallen log beside the creek for a while, just watching the water rush by. I ate half of my snack bar and put the rest back in my pack. After sitting there for maybe 20 minutes, I stood up and stretched. I felt like exploring a bit further upstream, just to see where it went before heading back to the cabin for lunch. I walked along the creek's edge for another 15 minutes. The ground was slippery with wet moss and mud, so I moved slowly, planting my boots firmly each time. The creek curved to the left around a thick cluster of cedar trees, and as I followed it around, I froze. There were footprints in the mud beside the water. At first I thought they were from a large dog, but then I saw the clear marks of toes. Bare human feet. The prints were fresh. The edges hadn't been washed away by the running water, or filled in with falling pine needles. I felt my chest tighten. My first thought was that it was probably someone camping nearby who liked walking barefoot. But I didn't see any tents or hammocks tied up, no campfire ring, no gear. Just the footprints leading along the creek and then up the bank, disappearing into the trees. I stood there for a while, listening hard. I didn't hear anything. No movement in the undergrowth, no voices, nothing. Just the rush of water and the light whisper of wind moving through the high branches overhead. I felt uneasy, but told myself not to be dramatic. I turned around and started walking back downstream towards where I had sat earlier. But I couldn't shake that tight feeling in my chest. My senses felt sharper. I kept scanning the trees on both sides. The hike back felt longer than before. Every little crack of a twig under my boots sounded too loud in the silence. When I reached the spot where I had washed my face, I paused. Something felt off. The fallen log I had sat on was there, but it had been moved slightly. It was shifted at an angle, like someone had lifted one end and set it down again. I felt cold spread through my chest and into my stomach. I looked around slowly, scanning the trees. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything. But I felt watched, like eyes were locked onto me from somewhere out there in the thick green shadows. I hurried back along the trail, almost jogging despite the slippery ground. I kept looking back over my shoulder, convinced I would see someone following me. But the forest stayed silent, just birds calling high above and the sound of my own breathing in my ears. The orange ribbons felt harder to spot on the way back, like they were hiding from me. Twice I lost the trail completely and had to backtrack, pushing through scratchy branches and slipping in mud. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood. Relief hit me so hard I almost felt dizzy. I stepped out of the trees into the open space. The cabin looked the same as I left it, with its small wooden porch and peeling brown paint. I hurried up to the door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. I locked it again behind me. I stood there in the dim light, catching my breath. My hands were shaking slightly. I felt stupid for being so worked up over footprints, but I couldn't help it. I sat down on the floor with my back against the door for a while, trying to calm myself down. My clothes smelled like sweat and damp forest. After a few minutes, I got up, poured myself some water from my bottle, and sat at the small table by the window. I ate the rest of my snack bar in silence, staring out at the trees. The forest looked peaceful, like nothing was wrong. But that feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. I spent the next couple of hours inside the cabin, cleaning up my gear and reorganizing my backpack for the next day's hike. But every few minutes, I found myself looking out the window, scanning the tree line for any movement. I tried reading a book I had brought, but I couldn't focus. The words blurred on the page, and my ears kept picking up little noises outside. The creak of tree branches, the rustle of leaves, or the tap of a pine cone falling onto the porch roof. By late afternoon, I felt restless. I decided to chop some wood for the stove before it got dark. There was an old axe leaning against the porch railing. I picked it up and walked over to the woodpile near the edge of the clearing. As I set a log upright on the chopping stump, I noticed something on the ground nearby. A cigarette butt. Fresh. The paper wasn't even discolored by rain or morning dew. I hadn't smoked, and no one had rented the cabin before me for almost a week, according to the guest log. My throat felt dry. I left the axe buried in the log and scanned the clearing. I didn't see anyone. The forest was still, but that didn't mean it was empty. I felt exposed standing there in the open. I quickly chopped 3 logs, grabbed them, and hurried back inside the cabin, locking the door behind me. My heart was pounding hard in my chest. I didn't want to stay another night, but the sun was already starting to go down. I didn't want to hike out through the forest in the dark. The trail was rough even in daylight, and I didn't trust my flashlight to last the whole hike back to where I had parked my car. I decided I would leave first thing at dawn. I spent the rest of the evening sitting in the corner of the cabin, facing the window. I kept the lights off so I could see outside more clearly. Every shadow between the trees felt like it was hiding someone standing still, watching. Night came fast. The forest went pitch black outside the windows. I could hear crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. At one point, I heard branches snapping in the distance. Not the little cracks of small animals, but loud, heavy breaks, like someone walking through without caring about noise. My stomach twisted. I sat there, gripping my folding knife in my hand, staring out into the dark. I couldn't see anything, but I knew something was out there. I didn't sleep that night. Every hour or so, I thought I heard something move outside the cabin walls. I heard footsteps on the porch once, slow and heavy. I held my breath, listening so hard my ears rang with the silence after the steps stopped. I waited for the door handle to rattle, but nothing happened. After a while, I heard the footsteps move away, fading into the forest again. When the first gray light of dawn started to filter through the windows, I stood up on shaking legs. My whole body felt sore from tension. I packed my things quickly, stuffed my sleeping bag into its sack, grabbed my backpack, and stepped out onto the porch. The forest was silent, but in a different way than before, like it was watching me leave. I walked down the trail without stopping. My legs felt numb, but I kept moving, one step after another, until I finally saw the little gravel lot where I had left my car. My car was the only one there. I unlocked it with shaking hands, threw my backpack into the back seat, and got in. I locked the doors before I even put the key in the ignition. As I drove away down the dirt road, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone step out onto the road behind me. But no one came. The forest disappeared behind me, mile by mile, until it was just I woke up before sunrise. My alarm hadn't gone off yet, but I couldn't sleep. The room felt stuffy and warm, even though I had left the window open a crack last night. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of my small apartment. I could hear the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the ticking of the old wall clock. My chest felt heavy for some reason, like there was something I was forgetting, but I pushed the feeling away and got up. I walked to the kitchen and made coffee. The bitter smell filled the space quickly, mixing with the damp morning air coming through the window. I drank it standing up, looking out at the dark, empty street below. There were no cars passing yet. Only one streetlight flickered at the corner, making shadows shift on the broken sidewalk. I finished my coffee and got dressed. A simple gray t-shirt and worn jeans. I slipped my boots on and grabbed my backpack from near the door. I didn't really want to go out that day, but I forced myself. I had told myself I'd go for a long hike to clear my head. There was this trail about an hour's drive away. It wasn't anything fancy, just a narrow dirt path that led up through dry rolling hills, with scattered oak trees and rough bushes along the way. I packed a bottle of water, some leftover bread in a zip bag, and a small folding knife. I locked up, went down the creaky stairs, and walked to my old car parked by the curb. The engine groaned before starting, sending small vibrations through the steering wheel. I drove with the windows half down, letting the cold breeze keep me awake. The sky was turning pale yellow by the time I reached the trailhead. I parked at a small pullout on the side of the road. There were no other cars around. For a second, I thought about just sitting in the car and listening to the radio until I felt like going back home. But I didn't want to waste the morning. I got out, slung my backpack over one shoulder, locked the car, and began walking down the trail. The ground was dry and cracked in places. Dust rose in small clouds around my boots. I kept my eyes on the path, watching for rocks or twisted roots. The hills rolled out on both sides, golden brown and silent, dotted with dull green bushes. After about an hour of walking, I stopped to drink some water. My throat felt dry already, and the sun was still rising behind me. I checked my phone for signal. There was none, as usual in this area. I kept walking, going further up. The path started to narrow as it curved around the side of a larger hill. The slope dropped away sharply to my right. I could see small animal trails crisscrossing below, weaving between thorn bushes and dry grass. I noticed old rusted fencing here and there, half buried under soil, probably from when cattle still grazed these hills decades ago. I walked for another half hour before I found a flat area with a few scattered rocks and sat down. I took off my backpack and pulled out the bread. It was a little stale, but I chewed it slowly, staring out at the hills. The wind was picking up, rustling the tall, dry grass. I felt tired already, like my body didn't really want to be out there. After eating, I closed my eyes for a few minutes. When I opened them again, the sun was fully up, bright and glaring over the hills. The shadows were short and the heat was starting to build. I decided to keep going for a bit before turning back. I put the trash in my bag and stood up. The trail continued up for another 100 meters before dipping down into a shallow valley. As I started down, I noticed how silent it was. Even the insects seemed quiet. There were no birds calling either. just the wind brushing through the grass and an occasional creak from the trees shifting their branches. I walked down into the valley. The slope was gentle, but the dirt was loose in places, and I slipped slightly once, catching myself with my hand on a rock. My palm scraped open on the rough surface and stung sharply. I looked at the small cut, wiped the dust off it, and kept moving. At the bottom of the valley, the path entered a small grove of oak trees. The shade felt cool on my skin after the climb. I stopped for a second to look around. The trees were twisted and old, their bark dark and cracked, with small tufts of moss clinging to them here and there. The ground was covered with fallen leaves, dry and curled up into brittle shapes. I walked through the grove slowly, feeling my boots crunch on the leaves. The air smelled of dry wood and old soil. As I passed under one low-hanging branch, something moved on the ground to my left. I turned quickly, thinking it might be a snake, but it was just a small lizard darting under a flat rock. My heart was beating a little faster anyway. I exhaled and kept going. When I reached the far side of the grove, the trail began to climb again. I could see the top of the next ridge from there. I pushed myself to keep going. My legs were getting tired, and my back felt damp with sweat. Halfway up, I stopped to catch my breath. I turned around to look back at the grove I had just walked through. The trees looked darker from this angle, almost black against the dry grass behind them. As I was about to keep walking, I saw something move near the edge of the trees. It was quick, just a flicker of shadow among the trunks. I squinted, trying to see better. At first, I thought it was a deer, but it didn't look like one. I couldn't make out any clear shape. It was just movement, like a person moving low to the ground. My mouth felt dry again, even though I had just drank water. I stood there, staring at the trees. Nothing moved again. I told myself it was probably just my eyes playing tricks in the shade. Maybe a branch falling or an animal slipping away. I started walking up again, trying to shake off the unease building in my chest. My ears felt hot. I reached the top of the ridge and stood there for a moment, looking out over the next valley. The hills rolled on endlessly, one after another. There was a narrow animal path leading down to the right, but I didn't feel like exploring any further. I decided it was time to head back. I turned around to start down the ridge, but as I did, I saw movement again near the trees below. This time it was clearer. Something was standing just inside the edge of the grove. It looked like a person crouched down low, almost squatting, half hidden behind one of the oak trunks. I froze, staring. The person wasn't moving now. I couldn't see their face, or even what they were wearing. Just a dark shape with legs bent awkwardly. I felt my heart hammering in my chest. For a few seconds, I stood there, trying to convince myself it was just a bush or broken branch that looked like a person from this distance. But then it shifted slightly, leaning more to one side, like it was trying to see up at me without being seen itself. A cold wave passed through my body. My hands felt numb. I forced myself to turn and start walking down. I tried not to rush, even though my instincts were screaming at me to run. The dirt crumbled under my boots and small stones rolled ahead of me as I descended. I glanced back once, but couldn't see the shape anymore. My breath felt ragged in my throat. When I reached the bottom and entered the grove again, I walked as quickly and as quietly as I could. Every step felt too loud. I kept looking around at the trees, expecting to see someone standing behind one of them. My ears were ringing with the silence. I could hear my own pulse thudding in my neck. Halfway through the grove, I stopped and listened. There was a faint rustling sound coming from somewhere ahead of me. I couldn't see anything moving, but the sound was there, like dry leaves being brushed aside. My skin felt prickly with fear. I started walking again, faster this time, almost jogging through the trees, ducking under low branches, stepping over fallen logs. When I reached the far edge of the grove and stepped back into the open valley, I felt my chest loosen a little. The sun was bright, and the hills looked empty. I kept walking, not looking back. My legs felt weak with relief and fear mixed together. I climbed back up the slope towards the main trail, feeling sweat running down my back in thin streams. As I walked, I kept looking over my shoulder. There was nothing behind me, no one on the trail. But every time the wind blew through the grass, I felt my heart skip, thinking it was footsteps. When I reached the top and started down the other side, I could see my car far in the distance, a small dark shape on the side of the road. I felt desperate to reach it. I walked as quickly as I could without running. My thighs burned with each step down the slope. My boots slipped slightly on the loose dirt. I nearly fell once, but caught myself before I hit the ground. I kept going, forcing myself not to stop, not to turn around. I felt like if I turned, I would see someone standing right behind me. When I finally reached the bottom of the hill and stepped onto the flatter part of the trail, I felt dizzy with relief. The car was only about a 10-minute walk from there. I pushed myself forward, feeling the sun burning into my skin, the air hot and thick. As I got closer, I glanced back one last time. The hills behind me looked silent and empty under the glaring sun. The trees of the grove were just small, dark spots in the distance. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before I managed to unlock the door. I slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking. I sat there for a few minutes, breathing hard, staring out the windshield. The trail looked peaceful, just dry brown dirt and waving grass under a pale sky. I didn't see anyone. There was no movement anywhere. Finally, I started the engine. It rumbled to life, loud in the silence. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the trailhead, gravel crunching under the tires. As I drove down the winding road back towards the main highway, I kept checking the rearview mirror. The hills looked empty behind me, stretching out into the distance, the trees standing still in the hot breeze. Even when I reached the highway and saw other cars passing, I couldn't shake the feeling that I woke up that morning before the sun had even come up. The air felt cold against my face as I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the quiet rustling of the trees above me. I was out there alone, in the middle of a thick forest that stretched for miles in every direction. It had been something I'd wanted to do for a long time, a solo camping trip, just to clear my head from all the noise back in town. I sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in my shoulders from sleeping on the hard ground. My small one-person tent felt cramped, but at least it kept the damp air off me during the night. I unzipped the flap and stepped out. The ground was covered in a thin layer of dew, and the smell of dirt and wet leaves drifted up. I stretched, looked around, and felt that quiet peace you only really get far from roads, buildings, and people. No cars, no voices, just me, the forest, and whatever lived out here. I boiled some water for instant coffee and oatmeal, holding my metal mug between my hands as the sun finally rose, its light creeping slowly through the dense pine trunks. I planned to hike deeper into the forest that day, just to see how far I could go before needing to turn back before sunset. I packed my food, rain jacket, first aid kit, and a small hatchet into my old black backpack. I took down the tent and folded it tightly against the bottom straps, making sure nothing was left behind on the patch of dirt where I slept. It felt like leaving no trace made me belong out there. I started walking on a narrow deer trail, the smell of pine needles and rotting wood everywhere. Birds chirped in the canopy, hopping from branch to branch, and every few minutes I would hear the sharp sound of a woodpecker knocking away at some dead tree nearby. I walked for hours, only stopping to drink water or check the GPS on my phone to keep track of my route. I knew the battery wouldn't last forever out there, but I kept it off unless I needed it. Around midday, I found a small clearing with long grass bending under the breeze. I sat there and ate a protein bar, listening to the quiet swish of grass and leaves. In the distance, I heard the creak of trees leaning against each other. There was something about that sound that made me feel small, like the forest didn't care I was there at all. I finished my snack and got up, brushing dirt from my jeans. As I walked, the trees seemed to get older and taller, their thick trunks rising up like columns holding the sky. The air smelled older too, heavy with moss and fungus. I passed fallen logs that were half rotten and covered in bright green patches of lichen. The ground was soft under my boots, and every step sank down a little, as if I was walking on a giant sponge. It was when I reached the edge of a narrow ravine that I noticed something strange. There were fresh footprints in the damp dirt, leading down towards the bottom. They were spaced out in long strides, like whoever made them was moving quickly. At first, I thought they might belong to a deer, but when I looked closer, I realized they were boot prints, almost exactly the size of mine. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. I hadn't seen any cars at the trailhead. I hadn't heard anyone. I thought I was alone out there. But seeing those footprints made the hairs on my neck stand up. I told myself it was probably just a hunter or another hiker passing through earlier that morning. Maybe I hadn't noticed them. Still, I felt uneasy, but I kept going. The ravine was steep, with loose rocks and dark wet soil. As I climbed down carefully, Grabbing onto exposed tree roots for support, I felt the temperature drop slightly. At the bottom, I found a small creek, its water clear and moving slowly over pebbles and fallen branches. I bent down to splash some water on my face. It felt icy and refreshing. When I stood up, I noticed the boot prints again, this time leading up the other side of the ravine and disappearing between two large boulders. Part of me wanted to follow them, just to see who it was. Another part told me it was better to stay on my planned route. But my curiosity got the better of me. I climbed up the opposite bank, slipping once when some loose dirt gave way under my foot. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed a bush to steady myself, small thorns pricking my palm. When I finally reached the top, I saw the footprints again, moving straight into a dense section of forest where the trees grew so close together their branches overlapped, blocking out the sun. The ground here was covered in thick green moss, and it felt like walking on a wet carpet. My boots sank down softly, making almost no sound. The footprints led me further in, twisting between the trees. I kept looking around, expecting to see someone at any moment, but the forest was silent except for the distant tapping of a woodpecker. The deeper I went, the darker it became, and the air smelled old and damp like an old cellar. I walked for what felt like another hour, but I couldn't be sure because my phone was turned off to save battery. I only knew I was getting far from where I had started. The footprints finally stopped near a large fallen tree. The trunk was split down the middle, and its inside was hollowed out with rot. Moss and mushrooms grew thick along its sides. The boot prints ended right there, next to it, and there were no other prints going in any direction. I stood still for a long time, staring at the ground, trying to figure out where they went. The dirt around the log was undisturbed, no sign of whoever it was walking away. It was like they just vanished right there. I felt a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. My heart was thumping so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stepped closer to the log, looking inside, but it was empty except for dark, wet rot and fat white mushrooms clinging to its inner wood. I turned around quickly, scanning the trees behind me. My ears strained for any sound that wasn't mine, but there was nothing. No birds, no wind, just silence. I felt like something was watching me from the shadows. My chest tightened with that heavy feeling you get when your body knows something is wrong, even if your mind tries to stay calm. I decided to head back towards camp. I turned on my phone to check my GPS, and saw the battery was at 19%. The signal was gone, of course. I dropped a marker on the map anyway, just to trace my steps back later if needed. As I started walking back through the trees, every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like any second I would see someone stepping out from behind a tree. After about 30 minutes of hiking quickly, my breathing was ragged and my shirt was damp with sweat. The forest still felt silent in that eerie way, like everything was holding its breath. I started seeing parts of the trail I recognized. A tree with thick moss growing halfway up its trunk, a broken stump where I had stopped to tie my boot earlier. I felt slightly calmer, thinking I was close to where I set up camp. But then I smelled something strange. It was faint at first, like rotting meat carried on the breeze. The smell got stronger the further I walked, until I could almost taste it in the back of my throat. I covered my nose with my sleeve and kept going, thinking maybe a deer had died out there. It happens all the time in the forest. When I rounded a cluster of thick trees, I saw what it was. There was a deer lying on its side, its belly torn open, rib bones sticking out, covered in dried blood. Flies buzzed thick around it. Its eyes were gone, just empty black sockets staring at nothing. The fur on its neck was matted with blood and dirt. But what made me stop dead in my tracks was that there were fresh boot prints in the dirt around the deer, circling it. The same prints I had been following. They went around it over and over, pressed deep into the soil, and then disappeared into the trees again. My stomach clenched, and I felt like throwing up. My hands were shaking as I gripped the straps of my backpack tighter. I didn't want to stay there any longer than I had to. I forced myself to keep moving, trying not to step in the blood-soaked ground around the carcass. The smell clung to my nostrils as I hurried away, breathing through my mouth. The sun was starting to go down now, long shadows stretching across the forest floor. I moved quickly, not caring how much noise I made. My boots crunched twigs and dead leaves with every step. All I wanted was to get back to camp before it got too dark to see. Finally, after what felt like an endless walk, I reached the spot where I had set up camp earlier that morning. I dropped my backpack and sat down on a rock, my whole body trembling with adrenaline and fear. I felt exposed sitting there. The trees felt closer somehow, pressing in around me. I forced myself to eat some trail mix and drink water to calm my shaking. As I sat there, I kept thinking about those boot prints. The way they circled that dead deer over and over. The way they just ended next to the fallen tree like whoever it was had disappeared into thin air. I thought about how quiet the forest had been, like everything was hiding from something. I decided I couldn't stay there that night. The sun was nearly gone, but I packed my things as fast as I could. My hands fumbled with the tent poles as I shoved them into my bag. I strapped everything down tight, slung it onto my back, and started hiking back towards the trailhead. The forest was almost pitch black within minutes. I turned on my headlamp, its narrow beam slicing through the darkness ahead of me. Every few steps I would stop and listen, feeling like I heard something moving behind me. Leaves crunching, branches snapping. I told myself it was just animals or the sound of my own steps echoing in the trees, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I kept walking, my breathing ragged, my headlamp shaking with every step. The battery icon on my phone was flashing red now at 5%, but I refused to turn it off. I kept checking the GPS every few minutes, making sure I was on the right path back to my car. My legs felt like they would give out at any moment, but I forced myself to keep moving. At one point, I heard something up ahead, a low rustling sound coming from the bushes to my right. I stopped and aimed my headlamp at it,